Hello SGD, this video will be a compilation of many videos I put up in episodes in the past, sometimes as a playlist and some individually, and the focus will be on the number 33, but also how it relates 33 and 32 relate to one another. Probably the first go-to point would be the importance of 33 in Freemasonry, but we were looking at ancient religions, ancient architecture, systems of weights and measures, town plans, and many other aspects. But I might not cover, well, I think I had a look at something like 5 hours in total, so this will go for about 2.5 hours. So it'll be a lot that I'm not covering or not going into as much depth as I might, but think of so 33 over 32, that'll be a theme which will come up because in maths and geometry there's a lot of nice connections there. But for instance, the tree of life, what we have are 32 sephiro and 22 paths, which gives you 32, but we have what's referred to as dart, the hidden sephiro. It's a bit esoteric and sort of Kabbalistic and that type of area. But that would bring, again, this reference to 33 and 32. 33 bones in the spinal column. I'll get into weights and measure systems, but the Californian Vara had 33 inches. In Harappa, in the Indus civilization, Mohenjo Daro, their unit of, so the street widths they had standardized city plans, town plans, and the widths of the street, and you also find it in dimensions of major temples and such in that area, but 33 feet was the standard measurement. A ruler has been found in Harappa or Mohenjo Daro, and that seems that their foot was based on units of 10. So 3.3 feet would be there, and then you divide that into 10. So that would work out that 33 of what we call a foot would have been 30 of the Mohenjo Daro foot, a ratio of 1 to 1.1, which is interesting because the Saxon foot and throughout history, this unit of measure, 1.1 of the English foot being used, pops up a lot, but 33 feet, again, Mohenjo Daro, you'll find it in other places. Now, Khafre's pyramid, the middle pyramid, is smaller than the Great Pyramid at 6 Egyptian cubits less high, which is nicely enough pi meters, but the pyramid itself was actually taller in the air because it sat on a platform that's higher than the Great Pyramid, and that's 33 feet. Now, I try to get the exact measurement, but they'll either say 10 meters or 33 feet. 10 meters is 3.28 feet. But there was also a terrace around which was 33 feet wide. Now, these are not just sort of one-offs. So again, in these other series I've gone through, cross time, cross cultures, across the world, you'll find this, for instance, just nearby, the Wall of the Crow. The exact height, again, I'm just going to put a question mark on it, but what we have is this unit of 10 meters or 3.28 feet or 33 feet. The unfortunate thing when you study is that the precise measures are either difficult to take because there's been some erosion or damage to the stone, but also that it's just not taken, if you're close enough is good enough often because the exact precise measures are not seen as super important. But again, you're in structure 10, was it not, or in Brodgar you'll see it, but for instance in House of a Temple in Washington, headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which has 33 degrees, 33 available, but only 32 are open. The 33rd is by invitation only, so 32, 33, but there are 33 columns, and each of those are 33 feet high. Now again, in other long series I did going through cities, state capitals, major public buildings, it just pops up all the time. Now, Rushton Triangular Lodge is another one. Sir Thomas Tresham, who was a famous occultist, as it was called, and the Triangular Lodge, so each side is 33 feet long, and each wall is an inscription of 33 letters. Okay, that one we'll come to later because weights and measures, but okay, so just as an intro, this is not an entire compilation of all the 33 presentations that I've did in the past, but it'll cover enough. And again, it goes from ancient times in religious texts. You'll find it in the larger Angkor complex as well. I think it's Phnom Penh. 33 gods on Mount Meru, and I'll go through those. But again, not a complete compilation of everything. That will go for nearly 6 hours, but we will be going through most of it. Now, at the very end, if you've got your compass and square, I'll show you how to draw a 32-point star, which means the 33rd's in the center. That's an important, and I'll go through that in terms of navigation and mapping. Prior to our more modern mapping system of longitude and latitude as we have it now, the old Portolan system was built around 32 pointed stars, so each star had a 33rd point in the center. Okay, so that's the intro. At the very end portion, so about the last 20 minutes, it'll run for about 2.5 hours. At the very end, there'll be a geometry how-to, so how to draw these things as well. So if you've got your compass and square, keep them handy. All right, have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and let's get straight into it, and a continuation of the importance of the number 33. Went into it in regards to systems of measurement, Freemasonry. As soon as you mention Freemasonry, all sorts of, well, I must say, hysterical elements get added, satanic, etc. Well, why is it then so important to Judeo-Christian, Islamic and Eastern tradition? So 33, where is it at? Ahura Mazda, so important in the Zoroastrian religion. The light, essentially, so you have Ahura Mazda versus Angra Mainyu, or the lying mind, or the Ari man. And the Ahura Mazda created the universe in 33 steps. Now, in the Bible, we have, well, firstly, let's look at Freemasonic symbols, where we have Jacob's ladder. Jacob is mentioned 33 times in the Bible until he had his dream, which is the dream of Jacob's ladder, and the pillow stone of Jacob as well. Now, it's interesting, in Genesis 33:1, that's where Jacob returned, and there was Esau coming with 400 men. Now, it's slightly off topic, this 400, but this is an important thing, because King David ruled for 40 years, 33 years from Jerusalem. Jesus, 33 when he died, but he spent 40 days in the wilderness. Now, you could also say 40 days and 40 nights of rain in Noah's flood, or after Exodus, 40 years in the wilderness. Now, well, 440, think eclipse, solar eclipse there, and some ratios, but let's just move on. So now, connected to Jacob's ladder has to do with Leah and Rebecca. Now, in regards to Leviticus and these books of law, 33 days for purification after birth before a woman could enter the temple. That was on the male. Now, if she bears a female child, 66 days. Now, 33 feet, 66 feet, all these other connections, but again, repeated themes, and so nicely connecting to measurement systems. But Orthodox prayer rope will you'll find variations in most of these things, but as a basic standard, there are 33 knots in the Greek Serbian Orthodox prayer rope. The Anglican rosary has 33 beads, 4 groups of 7, or the weeks, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 33 in total. Islamic prayer beads, again, some variations here or there, but again, the standard is 33 beads on there. Now, Al-Ghazali said that in heaven, you will be permanently the age of 33. Which, again, is a nice connection. Now, in Shakespeare, in Julius Caesar, he was stabbed 33 times. Now, an ancient description will say 23 with 1 stab wound, but the importance of Shakespeare here is the connections or alleged connections to Francis Bacon and to the number 33 and the origins of what would be called modern Freemasonry as an organization, as opposed to the craft guilds. But 33 and Caesar, If you look a little bit further into this, you'll find much deeper connections. But now in Eastern traditions, now the Wat Pho temple, Buddhist temple, now for instance 108 symbols, 153, 100. Okay, but what you'll find, there are 33 levels on this temple to represent the 33 levels of heaven. Jidanshan temple in China is 108 feet high, and it has 33 levels built into the architecture, again to represent the 33 levels of heaven. 33 gods on Mount Meru. Now, Phnom Penh, for instance, in the Angkor Wat, the Angkor Temple complex, it has 104 towers around that, but only the maximum is 33 at one time. Kuan Yin, who is very much fertility. Now, the connections between Mary, you could also say, but anyway, 33 transformations. In in Japan, she is known as Kanon, and in the pilgrimage, there are 33 sacred temples connected to her pilgrimage. What's more, in the Vedic, there are 33 devas. Now, if you go a little bit further into this, you'll find there are much more. This is actually a very short list connecting from the far west to the far east, this similarity. Now, Mongolian shaman, there are 99 Tengri with 33 chief gods. So this would be outside of that. But, okay, Taoist temples. Now, Emperor Zhu Di, he was the one who famously sent out the fleets to explore and travel. Well, he ordered 33 Taoist temples to be built on Mount Wudang. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, 33 heavens ruled by Indra, 33 heavens ruled by Mara. Indra good, Mara evil. But in India, you'll see Indra rides a white elephant with 33 heads. So 33 across religions, traditions going through, and other nice, so whether it's Judeo-Christian, Islam, Buddhist, Hindu, shaman traditions, really carrying through. And I'll do a video in regards to Shakespeare, Bacon, and some other stuff. But so 33 as a reflection and a tradition. So symbolically, now also you'll find from east to the west that the same units of measure are being used and the same sacred numbers are being repeated again. So it's not just the symbolism, it's literally the architecture and the measurements built into the architecture, and at certain points which unites various units of measurement. So from east to west, 33. In a random world, why would 33 come together? Why would it be repeated in measurement systems? And always, well, 33, it really is a thing. It's not limited to the West and Judeo-Christian, or let's just say Abrahamic, because it's also very important in Islam. So Jews, Christians, Muslims, but Buddhists, Hindus, shaman as well, keep coming back to this particular number. And maybe because 33 is double digits, same, but that's only if you're using the Hindu Arabic system of numbers. If you were writing it other ways, and other people did use a different numerical system, but they still came back to this number 33. So okay, Zoroastrians as well, 33, this same tradition, measurement symbols, just keeps being repeated, and it also links to other lovely stuff as well. But anyway, with that, cheers and have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'm just going to follow on with this series in regards to the importance of the number 33 across time, across cultures, across the world. This focus of this one will be on churches and cathedrals. And so number 33. Earlier I did an episode just on religion, so just some of the examples of Christianity and connection, or Judeo-Christianity, but also connections to Masonic traditions as well. So for instance, Jacob's ladder, Jacob mentioned 33 times before having this dream, and like the ladder, stairway to heaven. It's interesting, Genesis 33:1. But okay, King David, 40-year reign, but 33 in Jerusalem. Jesus, 40 days in the wilderness, but he was 33 when he died. Leviticus 12, 3, or is it 4? 33 days, also 66 days in regards to after childbirth and whether women can enter the temple. But Anglican Rosary, and this will be important, the Anglican Rosary, 33 beads. So now we go back to Newtown here in Sydney, St. Stephen's Anglican Church, by this very important, very important architect, Edmund Blackett. Not just for Australia, but it was also, at the time, he was considered something of a world expert on Gothic architecture. And this is just one of the churches he's built. And his original gravesite was here at St. Stephen's in Newtown, along with his wife. So that's St. Stephen's Anglican in Newtown. His body was moved to St. Andrew's Anglican Cathedral, the major cathedral here in Sydney, and there's a plaque there as well. Now, for instance, this is just a section from one of the booklets at the church, the St. Andrew's Anglican Cathedral. What it lacks in size, the clever treatment of the interior, entirely the work of Edmund Blackett, the brilliant architect who contributed many fine churches and buildings to Australia, including the Great Hall, main quadrangle at Sydney University, many other buildings as well. Blackett was a designer of some 100 churches and a world authority on Gothic architecture. His memorial plaque, okay, so St. Andrews are some of the finest examples of 19th century Gothic revival style. It was not the biggest church, but the beauty of it is a very beautiful cathedral. It's here in Sydney. We had some excellent architects and the stonemasons here at the time. Brilliant stuff here in Australia. But the tower height, 130 feet, but the height of the cathedral itself, 97 feet. So 130 minus 97 is 33 feet. It's embedded in there as well. But back to St. Stephen's Anglican Church, Newtown, by Edmund Blackett. So the height of the spire, 132 feet, or 2 Gunter's chain of 66 feet, or 4, sometimes called Rathbone chain, of 33 feet. So it's a nice division of 33. However, the length of the church is 110 feet long. That's 330 hands. But that's not the only reference, because inside the clerestory itself is 33 feet high. Now St. Peter and Paul's Old Catholic Cathedral in Goulburn, here in Australia as well. Entering from Burke Street, the visitor beholds an unbroken space of 141 by 33 feet wide. While the transept, so the long axis, so just like cathedrals are designed like a cross, so the long axis to transepts is basically the short piece going across. And they're 33 feet wide and 30 feet high, but 33 feet, again, in this Catholic cathedral. St. Patrick's Catholic Cathedral in Manhattan, the spires are 330 feet high, which brings us to Chartres Cathedral, which is one of the holy of holies of architecture. And it was at a time when Chartres and these other great early Gothic cathedrals suddenly popped up, this architecture, because before you had Romanesque, and so you had very thick walls with very little windows, very little light. It was a very dark space. What happened? Essentially, it's when the Templars, or you could say in the Knights of St. John, the Hospitallers returned from the Holy Land, there was an explosion of knowledge. The Corpus Hermeticum was reintroduced to Europe, and we saw an explosion of architecture. So, for instance, this is 377 feet high in total, 365 feet to Sun Tower, as it's called. So you have the Tower of the Moon, the Tower of the Sun. Now the stonework is 365 feet, as in 365 days per year, but the total height is 377. But that's done some videos previously on this, but keep in mind 365 feet, the Tower of the Sun at Chartres. But even the buildings themselves, why they have, essentially, in regards to their height, to their width, it's very thin walls. The walls themselves is largely glass. You have this massive space. This is extreme architecture, astounding architecture. And so other great cathedrals such as Chartres were actually the first buildings higher than the Great Pyramid. But the thing is, these were hollow. And so this architecture doesn't get the recognition that it, because this is hollow. Now piling up and building some shafts, Great Pyramid, awesome architecture. The volume is massive, but there is no ancient architecture that rivals the cathedrals, except for maybe the Pantheon, or the Blue Mosque and Sophia in Istanbul, in that they're hollow. And I would defy anyone who wants to say that these are because the blocks aren't as big, or well, you pile up a hollow pyramid. Best of luck to you. You make something like this with paper thin walls full of windows, the glass itself. It's still a mystery how some of these were to be done. Yet even computer modeling can't explain how these buildings hold themselves up. And now, they might not be in the most seismic areas, but over time, there's still, over centuries and centuries, you have a lot of, the Earth is dynamic, and these things are just effing fantastic, and they're just not included because, I don't know why, but this architecture rivals anything, really, not in volume, but in skill, to build a hollow, essentially paper-thin walls and support this height, and the beauty of it. Amazing stuff, amazing. But the nave is 121 feet high. One of another of these amazing cathedrals from this Corpus Hermeticum is Borgia. Pardon my pronunciation, but there we see the nave again, and these the domes and the flying buttresses, just brilliant stuff. And that's 121 feet high, the nave. Which brings us to St. Paul's Cathedral by Christopher Wren, very famous figure, very important figure. Now the total, so how high is it? It's 365 feet. Chartres Cathedral to the top of the stonework, 365 feet, 377 if you include the entirety of it. But again, a reference, multiple references, but St. Paul's Cathedral, well, there are 528 steps to the top, which is a nice little tip of a hat to this Hermetic knowledge but so the length of it, including the front steps, is 555 feet or 6,660 inches. The nave width is 121 feet. And to understand why that is important, we need to go back to, let's begin with Mohenjo Daro. So one of the standardized street widths in there is 33 feet. The Mohenjo Daro ruler is 1.1 modern feet, so therefore 30 Mohenjo Daro feet is 33 feet. However, the Mohenjo Daro foot of 1.1 feet or 13.2 inches is the same as what was later used, the Royal Babylonian foot, or the Saxon or Drusian or North German foot. This ancient measure actually drew on. Now, I did a series recently on pendulums and how all these different units actually, through the meter, through the second, all these apparently different separate units, such as this Mohenjo Daro, Saxon, Royal Babylonian, Drusian, will connect to the canonical foot and to the Royal Egyptian cubit and others. But so this is actually the Saxon foot. So when we look at Chartres Cathedral now, or others of the great cathedrals, especially in France, the English foot, 121 foot, what were they building with the English foot? No, they were building with the Saxon or the North German or the Mohenjo Daro foot, or the English. Well, it's actually hard to say because they're all the same, and they're actually through the pendulum, the second, the cubit, and the meter all come back and reinforce one another in harmonic ways. Not just everything will convert to something if you just with a simple conversion, but they convert back to whole numbers and beautiful whole numbers. But so 121 feet, that's 330 Saxon hands, which again is linked to the Royal Babylonian or the Mohenjo Daro and these other units. So 330, 333 in different units, it's always repeated. Now also at Chartres Cathedral, which portal is the west. And what we have is, well, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Ptolemy, Euclid, Euclid's Elements, famous geometry. So you have famous astronomers, mathematicians, Greek ones here on this Chartres Cathedral. But we also have dialectic, rhetoric, geometry, math or arithmetic, astronomy, and grammar and music. And what are they? They are grammar, dialectic, rhetoric, music, astronomy, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. These are the 7 liberal arts. Now, the 7 liberal arts are usually said to have emerged around about this time, because these type of cathedrals were not just temples. They were treasury buildings, university buildings, administrative centres. They were much more than just a church. And we see here, so they were teaching the 7 liberal arts here. There are many people who would just show that the 7 liberal arts have their origins at least in ancient Greece, which would then say, well, where did the Greeks and Romans, they learnt from Heliopolis and the Egyptians and the Chaldeans, so you could not stretching the bow too long to say that the 7 liberal arts emerged much older, but at least solid, in a solid, undeniable, factual sense, 7 liberal arts, Chartres Cathedral, and this period. And why is that important? Because look at a Mason tracing book. Now, Masons even say that they emerged from these cathedral builders. Could be a lot to be said about that. We see like a tracing board. We see the 3, the 5, and the 7 steps. Now we have, the 5 orders of architecture: composite, Corinthian, Ionic, Doric, Tuscan, which relate to one of the 5 senses. But we have the top 7 steps, and there's more to this than just this, but the 7 steps: astronomy, music, geometry, arithmetic, logic, rhetoric, and grammar, the 7 liberal arts. And here's a stairway up to what do we have again? Astronomy, music, that's geometry, just arithmetic, logic, rhetoric, grammar. We see the 5 Roman orders of architecture, and we have wisdom, strength, and beauty as well, which are the first 3 steps. Now these would also connect to the 3 Greek orders of architecture, which are Corinthian, Ionic, and Doric. We also connect to measure scales. But just as an example, so this inside Chartres and these other cathedrals, you'll see the compass and the square and the masons at work. And stone, masons began as stone masons, tilers, also brick masons. The skills, Masonic as in masonry skills as well, is even the masons themselves. So they'll even claim that it goes back further to Greek and Roman, because it's just full of stonework, and back to Egypt, where these the magic of the stone workers and the special skills involved, the science of doing, because it wasn't just hammer and chisel, they were using different methods. So, but anyway, that's something else. So the connections between the 7 liberal arts, geometry, music, arithmetic, and especially the quadrivium: astronomy, geometry, music, and arithmetic. And we see it used by architects, still embedded in all biblical traditions, but also going through to so this is Australia, but again going back to the ancient Gothic cathedrals as well, and it's always in there. It is essential. It is an essential part of this type of architecture, but we can find again in the ancient world, in ancient from the UK way right over to ancient India. It's there, it's repeated, and it's a constant. And it's not just one. It's not just about 33. It's about having multiple levels, such as 365, 528, and or 555 being 6,660 inches. And it's a long story. Anyway, cheerio. Have a good one. Hello, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'm going to add this to the 33 series and begin here in my home city of Sydney in this very iconic building. Just obscured a little bit behind there is the Opera House, but the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Designed by John Bradfield, a mason. And what's going on here? Well, each arch of the bridge is 1,650 feet long. And so therefore both arches, 2 arches, that's 3,300 feet. Now the rest of the building, the height from the deck to the water, from the water to the top of the building, the width, the length, all filled with very important, very influential numbers. But where else will we see it? So now over to New York. Now 42nd Avenue, 42 books of Thoth, 42 here and there and everywhere. But Grand Central Terminal, and we also, interesting feature is that we have this constellations in the roof. Constellations were apparently designed backwards by accident. It's just the God's eye view, as above, so below. They've just projected it down. That's what's happening because, well, a lot of interesting stuff there. But we have Mercury on the top, God of weights and measures, cornucopia, all sorts of standard, let's say standard symbols, and Grand Central Terminal, main concourse. Again, it's a major public building. It's not like a 7-Eleven or just some random McDonald's. Very important building, and that's why they have these themes. They highly very decorated, full of esoteric symbolism. Main concourse, 120 feet wide, or 1,440 inches, or 4,320 grain, etc., etc. It's all there. At 275 feet long, well, that's 3,300 inches. And therefore, the floor area, 120 by 275 feet, is 33,000 squared feet. This is all by design. There's a whispering chamber under there. So important structures that have this whispering chamber, but that's one of the call signs. Just like with the Mercury statue, whispering chambers is one of the call signs to these important buildings. But now we go over to Iowa and Des Moines. Growing up, I would have thought Iowa is not too important. MASH, Radar O'Reilly from Autumna, Iowa, but Iowa is a very important state, not just Des Moines, but also Mason City, Iowa. And one of the markers that pointed out is that we have one of these sculptures, these spheres within spheres, city within city, by Arnaldo Pomodoro. And for example, Washington D.C., UN, Vatican, and well, other very important, interesting sites. Certain sculptors, certain architects get the main jobs, and they're markers for important places. And what's important about Des Moines? First, let's go back. So 275 feet equals 3,300 inches. Iowa State Capitol building in Des Moines, 275 feet, 3,300 inches. Now, John Cochrane and Alfred Pickenard, interesting who the groups that they were linked to, such as one of these utopian movements, which the name of it escapes me at the moment. But again, the building, the symbols in there, the numbers, very important. They, again, highly designed. This is not just off-the-shelf design. These are bespoke buildings, entirely unique. Now you have in the state seal of Iowa, the Liberty Cap. So just like in North Carolina, with Liberty Cap, cornucopia, Liberty Cap, New York, United States Senate, Liberty Cap, Indiana. Again, these important buildings. So back to Grand Central Terminal and the Mercury statue on top. We get a more recent view, the Caduceus, the god of weights and measures. Also, we have the cornucopia and all these other symbolism, which doesn't at all fit into what would be called the Christian culture at the time, but it has strongly connected to the Corpus Hermeticum. Very interesting history in regards to that. Essentially, the Hermes Trismegistus, the Thoth, for instance, the 42 books of Thoth, even up to the 2nd century AD, the followers of Thoth, even through Alexandria, would have a procession carrying the 42 books, recognized by Clement, the bishop there at the time, and all carries on later. So basically the history of the alchemists. So with the Cleopatra, the alchemist, Maria the Jewess, Zoroaster, right through up until the Renaissance. But in Mason City, Iowa, there in the spirit of Mercury, god of business and finance, messenger of the gods. Mercury is Hermes, etc. Now the Grand Lodge of Iowa, which has one of the largest libraries in in the world in regards to this. Behold, the Lord stood upon a wall made by a plumb line, with a plumb line in his hand. Measurements on the level, same symbols, even or stoneworking symbols, and the tools, such as the plumb line. There's an older picture of a spirit of Mercury. This is the Daniels and Fisher building in Denver, Colorado. Again, I did a whole series on US state capitals, one on New York, a series just on New York, a series on Washington. It's just repeated over and over again, not just the measurement, but also the symbols connected with them, organizations, the architects, the sculptors, same names, same financiers, always consistently repeated. This is 330 feet high, the Daniels and Fisher Tower. It's probably not the best resolution, 330 feet high. Which brings us now, for instance, the Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco. If you've seen Secrets in Plain Sight by Scott Onstott. Also, I've got a video up on San Francisco. I'll go through all the major buildings, the monuments there, and the connections, all by these very important harmonic numbers which would connect to geometry, astronomy, music, and arithmetic as well. But the Golden Gate Bridge, Secrets in Plain Sight by Scott Onstott, it goes into the symbolism in regards to there, but what's happening. So we have the all the specs on there. So 4,200 feet is also, this is another 42. So 42nd Street, we have this major UN building, etc., etc. in New York. 42, very, very important number, which, so it's not just about 33, it's not just about 108, it's not just about 144 or 432,864. Each building structure will have multiple levels, include all of them. And so without breaking down, again, I could just go, it's all it's just too easy at this point. But the clearance is 220 feet. Clearance above the water, 220 feet. That's no points for guessing. 3300 Doric fingers. Now, also worth noting that the New York State Capitol building, that's 220 feet, or 3,300 Doric fingers also. The tower itself, so the tower base dimension, each leg 33 by 54, that's half of 108. Again, it's all there, but also worth noting the tower foundations as well. So 33 feet by 54. And 110 feet, which is half of 220, but that's 330 hands. So cross scales, cross things, and it all always links up. And so again, this is more tiny amount. I just these will just did a search in my old folders and pulled these ones out, because there is just it is necessary. When it comes to these major public buildings, pieces of infrastructure. Bridges are about navigation, travel, and commerce. Hermes, god of weights, measures, commerce of travelers, connected, of course, so to Thoth, and also astronomy. So they would have, it's always multiple levels. So you have astronomy in the Grand Central Terminal. You have the important measures and numbers which connect to astronomy, and to music and arithmetic, and you even have, again, it's a whispering chamber, so there's an acoustic quality to these buildings. This is, again, one of the common themes, where they design it in such a way where an important central, well, it's just a necessary feature. It's not just about one, it's not just about the second, it's about multiple levels of efficiency across multiple dimensions, because it's not just about one-dimensional measure, it's also about floor area. And usually I just deal with the one-dimension measures, but again, this is just one example where it's even the floor area. It's designed in such a way so it blends multiple levels. And again, like the symbol, so Arnaldo Pomodoro or Tony Rosenthal, Robin Blau here in Australia, Anish Kapoor, or architects such as Norman Foster, I.M. Pei, Daniel Libeskind, rock stars essentially in their respective fields. They get the prime commissions in the prime locations, and the Vatican is a city within a city, UN, city within a city. Washington, it's the District of Columbia. It's not a state. Again, it's this special area. And I would think that there would probably be something going on with Des Moines, but Iowa is important. So same symbols, same numbers, it's consistently repeated and locked in, especially with the esoteric organizations, whether it's the Druids, Oddfellows, Buffaloes, or most importantly the Masons. And again, the plumb line, cornerstones, the cornerstone ritual and ceremony connected with plumb lines, and the square, systems of measurement of construction, architecture, and these important repeated consistently themes. So these are just some more examples of 33. Doesn't really, it's across the ancient world, but it's still being used in this time now, and for major public buildings, whether it's capitol buildings, bridges, ports, train stations, commerce buildings, customs house types of buildings, anything connected within the Thoth, as in god of science, magic, wisdom, geometry, or Shesset, the female equivalent, or Hermes, or Mercury, as in mercurial. And again, it's on. You could go through these bit by bit. Yeah, it's repeated. Just some more examples, more on 33. I'll add this to the playlist. Again, Doric, or being as in the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns on the Mason tracing board, which is also a system of measurement. It's also a system of music, and also the proportions that they transfer to. Yeah, so very interesting. Anyway, cheerio. Have a good one. Hope you enjoyed. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and let's carry on with this series in regarding connections to the number 33. And I'll have a look at this famous sculptor, Anish Kapoor. And so previous episodes, we looked into the number 33, the symbolic aspects, the use of 33 feet. And in videos going back a while, I looked at specific architects and specific artists who got the prime commissions. The really important buildings, the really important sculptures in the really important places. And Anish Kapoor is one of these people. So, what's going on here? So this is Cloudgate in Chicago, also known as the Beam in Millennial Park. The City Beautiful movement started by Daniel Burnham, which was so important in the redesign of places such as San Francisco, Indianapolis, Washington DC, the Washington Mall. Daniel Burnham was behind the redesign of Colonial Williamsburg, which turned out to be funded by the Rockefellers. And so there are the City Beautiful movement and these connections, architectural, the town planning, and well, okay, let's just keep going. This is one of Anish Kapoor's sculptures. It's called Sky Mirror. This is in Melbourne, Australia, and the important part is that the sculptures of Anish Kapoor move around the world. So this is about 23 ton. This is one of the versions of Sky Mirror, and it's here in Australia. It moves around along with his other ones. So this is the Palace of Versailles. This is called Dirty Corner by Anish Kapoor. We also see one of his versions of Sky Mirror also there on display. So to get these okay, that's 70 meters long, or just happens to be 153 cubits long, but that's none of my business for the moment. These have been moved around. These are massive. These are heavy. A lot of money goes into just moving these things around, and then to get them placed in and displayed in Versailles. For instance, I've done videos before: Canberra, Brasilia, Washington, Astana. Just like the City of London and Versailles or the Vatican, these very geometric, symbolic places with not only the legal status, the architecture and the town plans, all filled. They're of the same pattern. It just carries on. So Mr. Anish Kapoor just happens to get his sculptures in the right place. at exactly the right place at huge, huge expense. So, like, even if I could fund it, I can't just drop my massive sculpture in Versailles. This is a historic location, but Mr. Anish Kapoor, he sort of gets them all the right places. And, well, what's going on here? So there we see what's called Dirty Corner by Anish Kapoor on display at Versailles. Now, just behind the cameraman would be one of his sky mirrors, as they're called. So what's going on? Well, we need to look back. So House of a Temple, headquarters of 33rd degree masonry in Washington, 33 columns, 33 feet high. Now this will come later, but let's just stick with 33. This is a Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis. I mentioned it's one of these places which has been touched by the City Beautiful movement. The arrangement of the city, the measurements, the height of the memorials, the height of the major buildings, the monuments, the state capitol, all connected, always on these harmonic numbers. Bespoke architecture, it's not off the shelf. Highly designed, highly architectural, unique buildings, and yet they happen to choose the specific set of numbers. For instance, it's 330 feet long. Go back again, this important. 33 columns, 33 feet high. Ionic, worth remembering as well. And inside the tiler's room, well, it's a cube with an edge of 33 feet inside the Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis. Which brings us to the auditorium. Now, the dance hall is 66 feet, while the tiles on the dance floor are 33 inches, which just happens to be a Californian Vara, but that's none of my business. But anyway, the arena there is a square of 33 feet. The stage is 82 feet wide, which will convert to lovely connections, but anyway, 33 feet deep on the stage. This is a very important repeated number. Even in the literature, it's not really a secret at all. But now here's an interesting little side note. The auditorium. So this is the arena, 33 feet wide, 33 feet deep. It's a square of 33 feet. The whole auditorium itself, from the back to the front, is 175 feet long. This is back to the American Civil War, the USS Baron de Kalb. Exact pronunciation, I'm not sure. Focus in, what's going on there? Well, compass and square. It just happens to be 175 feet long. I'm bringing this up because this is an example where it's not just about 33 feet or 108 feet. These buildings which I'm mentioning here have multiple sets of measurement. There is no coincidence. These are designed highly architectural buildings or structures, because it's not just about the buildings, cathedrals, temples, street plans. It also applies to, as earlier episodes, the Saturn V rockets and this is the military industrial complex. Let's just say they love and they incorporate these numbers, not just now because it goes back quite some time. So it's not just 33 feet. That could be described as an accident, but we see multiple sets. And why 175 feet? Well, 175 feet is 27.34375 Doric fathom. Doric and Ionic systems, ancient systems of measurement, also architectural styles, which we see on the Freemason boards as well. So the Ionic column and the Doric column. The column of wisdom, the male, or the Doric is a column, column of wisdom is Ionic, female. Doric is the column of strength, or male. 7.34375. And could be coincidence. Well, avoirdupois, 1 dram is 27.34375 grains. And Georgia Guidestones, 19.25 feet or 0.27344375 Doric chain. Doric fathom, Doric chain. And Thoth, Chesed, Hermes Trismegistus, Nuar and Fuzi, cross time, cross cultures, cross the world, gods of science, geometry, the quadrivium, also gods of weights and measures, who are connected to the compass and the square. This is not restricted to the Western, more modern Masonic tradition. This is very, very ancient systems of weight and measure. So Anish Kapoor, what's going on here? Why do I bring him up? Well, Dirty Corner here in Versailles. Now, one of his other sculptures is Orbit and ArcelorMittal, which is a huge industrial steel making company. So where is he gets his sculptures placed in these major public places, moved around the world, massive, large steel heavy sculptures, most of the time public funding to support him. But this is Orbit next to the London Olympic Stadium. Well, it just happens to be 377 feet high. Reims Cathedral, again, all the connections, well, anyway, the nave itself, 377 feet long. Of course, that's a coincidence because Chartres Cathedral, one of the holy of holies of sacred architecture, the quadrivium, literally built into the sculpture itself over the southern, or could be the northern portal. But anyway, we have the Vesica and we have Euclid and Pythagoras, amongst others, as well as the 7 liberal arts, the quadrivium, inside the main archway, and it is 377 feet high, which is a Fibonacci number. Now, for instance, same sets, all the same stuff's going on here, and so Eiffel Tower, who was that by? Mason architect. Second level, 377 feet. The first level, again, corresponds to these lovely sets of harmonic, architectural, astronomical, arithmetic, geometry, music, sets of numbers, ancient units of measure being also an important conversion point. George Washington Bridge, anything with George Washington's name on it, no surprise there. The towers themselves, 377 feet. So many other aspects. I've done this in other separate videos. Frederick Bartholdi, well, he's one of the brothers, and there are 377 steps from the lobby to the crown. This is a constant in this very important esoteric architecture, both ancient, which you might explain, or pre-industrial, where maybe more superstitious, but even it's still, people such as Anish Kapoor are still incorporating it. Temple of Artemis, anyway, the reconstruction, but by the old descriptions, 377 feet long, because the foundation of a Temple of Artemis is still there, so that can be measured and tested. Now, I mentioned earlier the civil war ship. Well, it's still happening to this day in modern ships, in NASA and others, because, for instance, these nuclear submarines, 377 feet long. The submarine itself, 33 feet wide, but it's actually 34 feet because you need to include the rubber insulation on the outside. 34 and 377 just both happen to be Fibonacci numbers. Oh, interesting that, isn't it? The Washington Monument should be aligned, and there are various descriptions of why it wasn't placed here where it should be. On the alignment, they said because the soil was not strong enough to support it. Well, there's a lot going on in the Washington Monument, and it just happens to be 377 feet off alignment, amongst other aspects what's going on there as well, because reasons it's the current year. It's all coincidence. Nothing going on here, even though you can measure it. Now, let's have a look. This is by Anish Kapoor. Now, underneath it's even called an omphalos. The measurements is all there, all the harmonics, but let's just focus on that now. It's 66 feet wide and 33 feet high. The Dirty Corner I mentioned by Anish Kapoor, currently or at the time was on display in Versailles. Now, you try and go to a historic site and do something like this. You're going to need a team of lawyers. You're going to need big, even with big bucks, you're going to have a big hard time trying to get this put in place. But yet Mr. Anish Kapoor happens to get his structures and sculptures moved around the world, dropped in the right places, including Sky Mirror. But anyway, Dirty Corner, it came to be known as the Queen's Vajayjay. Anyway, so got a bit of a nasty yeast infection going on there. But anyway, it's 33 feet high. Interesting. Now, if you look up, this is one of the problems with this whole area. People don't take measurements. They sort of just round things off. People don't know how to convert metric to... But Sky Mirror in 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Well, I've covered this in other videos. This is entirely it's all there. And you'll often see it referred to as 35 feet. Now, if you look multiple descriptions of it, 35 or 11 meters, 35 feet or 11 meters, that's about right. but sometimes 35 feet and 10 meters. No, that's not right, because 10 meters is 32.808 feet, but it's also described as 33 feet. There are different descriptions of it, but well, based on all these other connections, for instance, this dirty corner here is 153 cubits long. Interesting. Or coincidence. S-curve by Anish Kapoor. Oh, well, he just happens to get this big heavy sculpture placed in, again, on display in this really expensive location. To move these things is not easy. And well, where's this cash coming from? Why are certain architects, certain sculptors getting prominent positions? Well, what's going on there? Measures approximately 33 feet long by 8 feet. Of course, that's just coincidence once again. I'm just lucky, I guess. Well, what is ancient is new again. They are always of the right height, of the right length, or the right width. They're always in the special places. The same architects, the same sculptors, the same themes, such as the Omphalos, Millennium Park, and if you follow now, for instance, there Chicago, I mentioned Daniel Burnham, leader in the City Beautiful movement, redesigned Chicago, 66 feet wide streets with 12 foot or 144 inch sidewalks on either side. I'll do that separately because that's another thing that's going on, but 33, it just happens to be the same specific units, which are so intricately connected to this really important ancient systems described in ancient texts, repeated in the great cathedrals, ancient temples. It always comes back. It's always by the same people, and you've got your head in the sand if you think it's a coincidence, because it can be measured. Have a good one. Hello S3D, Sacred Geometry Decoded. And a follow-up from the last episode where I was looking at aspects of navigation connected to 33. And all the aspects of that. So where are we going? Now, there is, in regards to navigation, there is one good point to talk about that 32 over 33 division. So, for instance, you have north, south, east, and west, and then we divide them into northeast, southeast, etc., northwest, southwest, and then we have east, southeast, and etc. So that is one explanation for this particular aspect. Now, given that the people involved, the architects, the navigators, and so forth, had such strong connections with, in air quotes, the esoteric, let's go a little bit further and to basically remove it. So now, this is a pyramid of peace and reconciliation in Astana, the capital city of Kazakhstan. This is designed by the architect Lord Norman Foster. Now, there's a whole bunch of metrology and symbolism going on in this building, so I won't go into that particular method right now. But this will go on to show that it's not just about northeast, southeast, and then the divisions of the cardinal points, because the pyramid of peace and reconciliation by Lord Norman Foster, Astana, Kazakhstan, the capital city, which has the same geometry, metrology, symbolism, such as Washington, Canberra, Brasilia, and Astana. You'll find it in the Vatican or the city of London as well. Okay, let's actually pause a moment. Okay, so I just mentioned Washington, Brasilia, Canberra, and Astana. These very essentially regional world capitals. The architects, the metrology, the symbolism, the geometry of the city, etc. And so let's look at the city of London. Just as with the Vatican, it's one of these unusual cities. So just like Washington DC, Canberra ACT, Australian Capital Territory, Brasilia FD, or the Federal District, and Kazakhstan, the Akmola province, has this very unique legal status. So DC is not a state, it's a district. So the City of London is one of 33 local boroughs. There are 32 boroughs, but the City of London has its own police force. It's a separate entity in that sense. And the connection to 33, now my computer's freezing up, but this will come back to this. So it's a distinct area going back quite some time, legal status, but this City of London, 32 boroughs, around the 33rd, the city of London, this ancient city. Which brings us back to Kazakhstan, or Astana, by Lord Norman Foster, who was so instrumental in some recent important buildings, such as the Gherkin in the city of London. Now, if we go, now what we have in this pyramid of peace and reconciliation, you have 3 levels. So you have for the plebs, then we have a middle level, and then we have this top part, which is illuminated. The glass shines through. There are actually columba doves embedded into the glass there. Kazakhstan Astana is now exploded in power and importance. It's now a diplomatic center for that part of the world. And this is in the illuminated section here at the very top. What we have is this diplomatic table, and what you have is 32 radial points around the 33rd central core, 32 around the 33. Now that happens in the Kazakhstan flag. There are 32 rays around the 33rd. It's on the flag, but it's also on the symbol on top of the presidential palace. And I mentioned earlier episodes, well, the presidential palace, along with it just happens to convert to 330 Doric and Ionic, as in Doric and Ionic column on Freemason tracing boards, but of course it's very ancient practice. So what do we have? 32 around the 33rd, illuminated by the sun disk. It's also interesting, you'll see these clocks, especially the older design, where you have all these radial points. Well, the 32 around the 33rd, but anyway, so these regional capitals, these important architects, such as Oscar Niemeyer, Norman Foster, now I could go into Burley Griffin and L'Enfant and connections there, but this is the cathedral in Brasilia, designed by Oscar Niemeyer, who also did the UN building, for instance. The bell tower 66 feet, the cathedral itself 132, they're all divisions of 33 feet, loaded with info. But if we go on the inside, what we have is these columns. And it's interesting, there's 3 angels, 220 pounds, 440 pounds, 660 pounds, bit of music going on there. But what you have is 16 columns divided with the 16 windows, so you have 32 around the 33rd core point. Now, St. Paul's in London by Christopher Wren, this very, very important, very interesting character. So if you look up to the sky in St. Paul's, London, you have 32 columns around the 33rd core point. That is there. That's the core. And it's interesting to note that including the metal cross on top, it's 365 feet high. There's always multiple levels of symbolism connections in these buildings. You could, if it's just 1 or 2, you can dismiss it. But the buildings, whether it's their proportions, but also their measure, connecting to astronomy, it is repeated, consistent, it's there all the time. So that's in the sky. But if you look to the floor of St. Paul's directly beneath, what do we have again? 33 over 32. Why do these cathedrals, they have the same aspects in regards to navigation, and this 32 around the 33rd. Now notice the stained glass window. Well, this actually divides up 33rd core point around 32 points on the outside, which is just like the Millennium Wheel there in London. 32 carriages around the 33rd core point. What's old is new again. This is Palma Cathedral, one of these old great cathedrals. It's in Spain. What's going on in the wheel there? Well, there's actually 32 points around the 33rd core point again. St. Mary's Cathedral here in Sydney, Catholic Cathedral. Same thing again, 33rd in the core, around 32 around. This is in Belgium, in Brussels, Kirkelberg. Now the dome, 108 feet. The length, cathedral, proportions, all the same, harmonic, beautiful stuff's going on. We also have this dome, and again, it divides up into 32 divisions around the 33rd core. This is a very interesting city, Karlsruhe in Germany. I think I've got the Google Earth open, but anyway, we'll give it a second for that to load back up again. Very interesting city, the history, the connections in there. Here's an example of a map. There's another. 32 radial points, spoke wheel around the outside. So again, 33rd is the core. It's also interesting, originally the plan was to have a church here. Now, as is so often the case, the original design by the architect gets taken over by other events, political, financial. So where the church was meant to be, the architect, his vault was later topped by firstly a wooden pyramid and now a permanent stone pyramid. And it just happens to be at the right particular number, but that's 21 feet, so but that's something else. Let's not go into that now. But 32 around the 33rd. Now, another interesting building is the Voortrekker Monument in South Africa. I'll put a link in there. Jeff Lewis did some connections in regards to their alignments to other important memorials around the world. But the measures, it's all there. I've done a video on this as well. Also Egyptian connections. So it's connected to Aten. That's basically the architect Gerard Mukhdik was studied the Akhenaten and Nefertiti architecture. There was so much Egyptian symbolism in the original plan, including sphinxes and obelisks, they had to remove it because there was protests about that. So it's a modern monument to a relatively modern event in South African history, yet it was so Egyptian, had to be changed. There's all sorts of sacred geometry, all by the measures and numbers, but covered that so many other videos. But what do we have again? Well, the double chevron, which is also a water symbol, primordial waters, and the sun ray. There's a little aperture in the roof. In December 16th, a sunbeam will shine through and illuminate the cenotaph. And what do you have? You have 32 around the 33rd core point. Once again, so through the aperture in the roof on a particular day will shine through and will illuminate the crypt through this well hole, and Egyptian symbolism as well. But again, this 32 over 33. UN flag, 32 sectors around the 33rd core point. US dollar, 32 and 33. And I think it's also worth mentioning, though I'd put a little question mark, asterisk, but just I'm going to mention it. The Great Pyramid is 440 cubits, so if you divide that down, it will break up into units of 55. Now, if I divide it any further, it would be 22.5. But that whole number division of the pyramid will make 8 on each side. 8 times 4, 32. So again, we have a 32 around the 33rd core point. So it's not just about navigation and mapping. I talked about this in the previous episode. One explanation could be, oh well, because you have north, south, east and west, and then northeast, southwest, southeast, northeast, etc. You divide them down. That is reasonable, that's logical. But given the other connections, so these people who are so important in this system were also so embedded in developments of weights and measures, but also Rosicrucians, Theosophists, Freemasons, and these types of organizations as well, who were very philosophical, esoteric in that way. So just to cut that off at the pass, because it's also in modern architecture, it's in ancient architecture, it's in Protestant. Astana is a Islamic country, but you'll find it in Protestant countries, you'll find it in Buddhist countries, you'll find it in Catholic nations, Catholic cathedrals, for instance. And it's not just about the symbolism of 32 around the 33, because you'll also see in cathedrals, so 33 feet repeated so often. Again, I've individually covered various churches, cathedrals, public buildings, whether it's not just public buildings in lawmaking, but again, cathedrals, temples, it's just repeated previous episodes. So, but also the systems of measurement and the uses of these important methods. So what's old is new again. Where it is where these important architects are working, where these important political centers, as well as let's just say, just again, overall term Masonic, and same architects, same money, same systems, repeated across time, across the world, across cultures, and it is more than just the apparent. So you could dismiss it as, well, it's just a division of the cardinal points. Well, that's reasonable, but it doesn't hold up in the long term. And given the usage of it consistently in various forms, whether it's measure, symbolism, and well, Catholic, Protestant, in Islamic nations, in all the main cultures, religions. I did just an episode on how important it is in religions, cross time, cross the world, cross cultures. there is something more happening here. Now, I'm cautious in regards to that, what it exactly is. At the very least, what you can do is you can find it repeated, you can find it in measurement, you can find it in street plans, town plans. You don't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to design a city. You don't just wake up and say, oh, let's do a cathedral, let's do a temple. It's huge amounts of effort, huge amounts of design, planning, financing, the legal aspects of this type of thing, and that it's repeated so often in so many different forms. This is coincidence can't describe it. You know, once it happens, twice is coincidence, as they say. Third time is enemy action. So this is repeated, and coincidence doesn't quite work so well for people involved, and not just practical sense, but they're also very interested in philosophy, these types of aspects. So whether it's the architects I showed earlier, or the cities, it just is, and it can be measured, it can be repeated. And the beauty of it is that it is a working theory, because it will actually predict future buildings and future structures. And so where it's Norman Foster in the in Moscow, yeah, it predicts in the future, and that's the most important aspect of it. It's not just about describing the past or showing what's happening in the present. You will find it repeated in the future, and that means it has importance to these people who have contacts and who have big money and have the authority to design not just a building, but whole capital cities, and the buildings in them repeating the same method. Yeah, it's, you know, the burden of evidence is on those who would say otherwise, because it's just a constant cross-time, cross-world, cross-cultures. With that, hope you got something out of it. Enjoy. Playlist in the description, the early videos, and have a good one. I think another interesting point in regards to street plans is to consider, so whether it's New York, London, Paris, whatever city exists now, let's imagine that tomorrow we all disappeared and everything went back to the Stone Age, and in thousands or hundreds of thousands or a million years, some people were to go around and beginning architecture again. The street plans would still remain, because copper, gold, silver, tin, lead, they last forever, for eternity. So let's take New York as an example. The copper lines of the electricity, the water supply, telecommunications, they will still exist and will continue to exist until the crust of the earth gets swallowed up. So you'll often hear, was there an ancient civilization? If they were not advanced in that they were running water pipe and those type of amenities, because those things will last forever. Now, even iron will rust, but the iron is still there in the form of iron oxide. So even in a million years, all our power cables, which have a copper outside but an iron core, they will still be there, just in the form of iron oxide. They will exist even forever. So iron will rust, but it still remains iron. The element is not destroyed, and just by running a magnet along, you will find that our power lines, water lines, which tend to follow the streets and roads, they will exist forever. In a million years, whether it's Paris, London, New York, whatever city has got power and water supply, its record will still be there. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and let's just jump straight into it, and the continuation of the series in regards to the number 33. So why is this interesting? Well, it's going to have to do with mapping and navigation. But as is so often the case, there has been a division between the exoteric and the esoteric, yet there is a strong overlap. I think it's not a good way to go, I would believe, to define them separately and to place them into as if they're polar opposites. There's a lot of crossover. So whatever religion, philosophical tradition, there are some big questions in life. That's, for example, who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? Well, you can find some of the crossover in this in regards to navigation. And what do you do in navigation? You measure angles, you measure time, and you measure distance, which will directly link to Hermeticism. So whether it's Thoth or Shesset, Nuar and Fuzi, Nengashida, or Hermes Trismegistus, the god of travelers, geometry, commerce, weights and measures. God of travelers, the god of geometry, god of weights and measures. And what do people engaged in commerce do? They need to navigate. You could also apply this to military navies or moving armies. You need to know where you're going, how long it will take to get there, how far it is away. Well, that links because what do you do when you navigate? What are the big questions in navigation? Where am I? Where am I going? When will I get there? Very similar to these spiritual, metaphysical questions in regards to religion. So map making, navigation, cartography, geometry all links in together. This is a state library here in Sydney, New South Wales. And if you go just around the corner there, what you have here is a statue of Matthew Flinders. Inside on the floor of the State Library here in New South Wales, you see the Tasman map by the famous navigator explorer Abel Tasman. And there we see an unfinished map. Now, here you get a better view from the balcony looking down. You can see started to map Australia. Now, parts are missing, and also it was believed that New Guinea and Indonesia are connected to Australia at the time. I mentioned Matthew Flinders. That's a statue next to the Mitchell wing of the library. This is a map by Matthew Flinders. It's the first very, very accurate map of the coastline of Australia. He was also the first person to give the name Australia to Australia. Back then it was called New South Wales. What's Western Australia was called New Holland. Under Governor Macquarie, Lachlan Macquarie, so important in bringing in street plans, town plans, architecture in general, and incorporating very special measures and angles into the street plans. He, through his dispatches back to England, that's where Australia became Australia. Before that, it was New South Wales. But so Matthew Flinders coined that name, Australia. Oust is in south. Now some would even, okay, that's something else, but this come from Matthew Flinders. He was a Freemason. Governor Lachlan Macquarie, even in the more tame biographies, describe him as a conscientious Freemason, a very strong practitioner of a craft, not just a member of it in terms of a social club. So if we compare the Matthew Flinders map and the early one, we see there the development of the map. As of course, maps got better. Now the Tasman map, we've also noticed the ruler, the compasses, there's other things going on. But there's another really, really important thing happening here. And we'll look at these comparisons now back to the Tasman map. And we're focusing on this rosette here. Now you'll see there or there, over here as well, these certain points in this map, because this goes to what we have is a compass wheel which have 32 points around the 33rd central core, 33 rays around the 33rd core. That's where you see one example there. Of course we have other ones. Now we bring up the famous Perry-Reese map. What's happening here? Well, we have the same thing. So we have these rosettes, compass wheels, with 32 rays emanating from the 33rd central core point. Is another example. So the Perry-Reese map is what's this system of mapping Portolan or Portolan mapping. This is the old mapping system. And here's another example of a Portolan mapping system based on the number 33. Yet another example, again, 30 from any of these compass wheels, central points. What you have is 32 rays extending from the 33rd central core. So where you are is 33, and there are 32 options. Let me pause a moment. This is a very important famous person in regards to Australia and navigation is Captain Cook. This is his compass again, and what you have is 32 points around the 33rd central core as well. So it's pretty much a constant. But back to the State Library of New South Wales, Matthew Flinders map just around, Matthew Flinders statue just around the side there. Freemason. Now, Matthew Flinders was the great-grandfather or the grandfather of the famed Egyptologist Matthew Flinders Petrie. Matthew Flinders Petrie, just before he left for Egypt, did the first geometric survey of Stonehenge. I could go into, because he did it before the alleged, before it existed. This guy had surveyed it properly, very accurately, but that's something else. But and the son or the grandson of Matthew Flinders Petrie went on to do some very important geometry as well. So it's a very illustrious family in that sense. But so the Matthew Flinders, the Tasman map, and this is the map of Australia by Matthew Flinders. Very important, because we see here a separation between the old and the new, where he has both the old and the new. And by that I mean what we have is longitude and latitude, the more modern mapping system. But we also have the 32 around the 33rd core point. Where am I? Where am I going? When will I get there? Navigation. So there's this physical sense of navigation and having to know where you are, what the time is, how far it is away, to know where you are going. But this would also extend, because the people engaged in this were also so often clergymen, astronomers, geometricians, philosophers, and just generally hermeticists. So they were actually asking both these questions. So whether it was Descartes or Leibniz and these other famous mathematicians, astronomers back, they did not separate these questions. They were Renaissance men. They were engaged in multiple fields, and this artificial separation of topics that we have now, sadly. But here we see both the modern longitude and latitude system as well as the older mapping system, so a blend of the old and the new. So navigation in a spiritual sense, but also in a very physical sense, and so important to civilization, culture, and these other aspects. And especially if you look at the history of these particular people, what they were studying, so whether it was John Dee, Edmund Gunter, and these esoteric people were also heavily engaged in Euclidean geometry, astronomy, and these types of aspects as well. Also non-Euclidean geometry, but Okay, now let's fly over to Portugal. This is a monument to the discoveries in Lisbon, in Portugal. It just happens to be 66 feet long, and I'm going to do that soon because that's very, very 33 times 2, but there's very important in regards to street plans and astronomy and some really other measurements of time, distance, speed. Just like, yeah, anyway. So this, I think it was donated by a South African government. This is a compass rose next to the monument to the discoveries in Lisbon, Portugal. And again, we have this compass rose, which has 32 rays around the 33rd core. The monument itself has all these sculptures of famous scientists, navigators, and discoverers. And we have 16 on one side, 16 on the other, with Henry the Navigator standing at the front. So 16 plus 1, we have 33 again. 32, and with the 33rd, Henry the Navigator. Now this is the opening of the monument to the discovery. So as you can see, the monument itself is a boat. It's a sailing ship. And what happened at the opening? 32 ships of 14 nations were there for the opening ceremony, making the 33rd boat the actual monument itself. So we have the 32 around the 33rd compass rose, we have the 32 accompanying the 33rd discoverer, scientist, navigator, and we have the 32 ships plus the 33rd being the monument itself. UN flag has 32 sectors around the 33rd central core, American dollar. Also the connection between 13 and 33, but I'll do that sometime in the future, but the American dollar, 32 feathers on one side and 33 on the other. But okay, this is just some of the connections to the esoteric organizations and the measurable, the sciences. So if you go back not too long ago, you can't separate the esoteric and the exoteric. The esoteric philosophers, investigators were also the ever so important fathers of science. So, for instance, Isaac Newton was an alchemist and very, very interested in mythology and other aspects. Now, you also find the same with Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein or Oppenheimer. It's just not spoken of because now it's become very unfashionable to talk about these things. But the people who established our weights and measure systems, navigation systems, science in general, were Hermeticists, and this is really undisputable, but it's just not fashionable to talk about it because, well, it's the current year and we shouldn't say these things because we're all rationalist materialists now. Let's expunge this part of our history because it makes us uncomfortable. Well, no, if you forget your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So what we have is quite an elaborate set of systems of measurement, navigation, philosophy, and all these are actually blend in together nicely, and we find that these ever so important people who are so important to establishing, whether it's constitutional law, universal literacy, and all these things we take for granted, were actually these evil, Illuminati connected people. But, well, it's a shame, to be frank. And this is just another aspect of 33, whether it's a symbolic aspect in architecture, whether it's a measurable element in astronomy, whether it's got to do with cartography and navigation. And there are just these solid links between these because you follow the individuals, you follow the architects, you follow the artists, you follow the people ever so important in setting up standards of weights, measure, time, navigation. They all come back to the same theme, the same systems. It just carries on all the time. But it's, again, yes, it's now very unfashionable. It's not not cool anyway. But that's a shame. So with that, navigating in the physical sense, but also the weights and measures, Hermeticism, Hermes, and also the philosophical aspects which blend over. We shouldn't be separating esoteric and the esoteric because the esotericians were also masters of geometry, navigation, alchemy / chemistry, and these other aspects. So the important questions in the mortal realm are also very similar to the metaphysical spiritual questions that plague us as well, or should I say plague, that still live with us anyway. But with that, hope you enjoyed, you got something out of it. I'll be adding this to the 33, I've got a playlist, so I've done a whole bunch of on 33, 288 and some other stuff, but this will all be in the playlist. I'll try to remember to put the playlist link in the description. But yeah, with that, cheerio and have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and I'll add this to the 33 playlist, and I'll be looking more at the numbers of there. So in Goulburn Street, Sydney, across the road from the, it's no longer there, basement 33, but just a little interesting point. But Disneyland Club 33, very important, interesting number, but why 33? And even just, for instance, the Wikipedia page has most of the interesting things in regards to why this particular number is, well, of special interest. Firstly, so in binary, it's 10001, which means, so 33 in binary, or base 2, which is in itself, it's a palindrome, so it's like race car, or laminate pet animal, or as I P, Sir I C Pisa, same backwards as forwards. And there's some more to go to that. Now, but also in, doesn't mention it, but in 33, base 10, that's how we'd write 33, but in base 33 numeration, it's 10. So there's a nice little repeat thing going on there. It's also the smallest odd rep digit that is not a prime number. This has to do with number theories, but recreational number theory as well. The sum of divisors of the first six positive integers, and that it's the first 6, we'll come to that later, but it's interesting. So, 1 is going to be divided by 1, 2, you can divide by 2 and 1, 3, 3 and 1, 4 can be divided by 2, 4, 2 and 1, etc. You add up the first 6 and you get 33. We'll come to this again later. Smallest positive integer that is yet to be represented as a squared plus, a cubed plus b cubed plus c cubed. There is conjecture that 33 can be represented this way. I'll put a link in the description in regards to the puzzle of 33, a number file video which talks about that a little bit more. It's also the sum of the first 4 positive factorials. We'll get into that as well. So we have some of these are the interesting properties of the number 33. And now I put this link in how to draw a pentagon or a pentagram, because in this series I did on pentagrams. So why 33 connects with a pentagram? Well, 33 degrees, but let's say this number 288 especially, which I linked. So let's look at the 6/5 ratio, which is so important. So a seed of life to get the hexagon, it's the 6-sided poly. Seed of life and the 6/5, the macro, so the microcosm and the macrocosm as well is often represented as 6s and 5s. And so there we have the seed of life, which gives you that divides the circle perfectly up into 6, so you get the Star of David. Then we can use those points to divide up into a 12-pointed star now, from a 6 to a 12-pointed star. And that's a good way to draw a 12-hour clock, but it also good at 30 degrees, 360 divided by 12, 30 degrees, but also the zodiac connection, also the 12 months of a year. It also forms a geometry to get your very good Knights of Malta cross. And then from the 12-pointed, then we can divide it up again to get a 24-pointed star. So we have both the Knights of Malta and the a Templar cross coming from there. So now we've divided it up into 15. So if we put that on top of a compass wheel there, and so we start with the axis at 360, but if we set the axis to 288, what happens is with this 15-degree division, now we have 273 degrees. Equilateral triangle, we get 33 degrees and 153. Covered these, especially 153 is well known. 273, there's a mountain of really important stuff going on there, but they are connected. In the pentagram series and others I've covered it, but let's just move on. So from the pentagram and this 33, 153, 273, which brings us back to the basic number properties of 33. So to begin with, 33, 153 and 273, there I have it in binary. And what's going on there? Well, we have back to the thing of 33 being a palindrome in binary, same backwards as forwards. The smallest odd rep digit, it is not a prime number, so yep, and base 33 and base 10, but there's more, especially with palindromes. And like as in, well, race car or laminate pet animal and all these other palindromes, examples, same backwards as forwards. There are 10 kinds of people, those who understand binary and those who don't. So, okay, well, binary in 10 in binary is 2, so that's where that 10, it's actually, so there are 2 kinds of people in binary, but like so 33 degrees, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, same backwards as forwards. 153, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, same backwards as forwards. 273 as a binary, also same backwards as forwards. In hexadecimal, base 16. 153 is 99, so same backwards as forwards. And especially 273, there are a lot of examples of that, which is interesting. Now, so it makes 33 interesting, especially in that way, and also again connects these particular sets of numbers, 153, 273, all very sun, earth and moon. Different bands of the sun revolve at different speeds, so depending on where you are, north or south of the equator of the sun, on the sun, if you could stand there, the length of day is different, but at 33 days is one of a sun day is also 33 days. But 33, smallest positive integer, which is yet to be represented as a cubed plus b cubed plus c cubed. There's that number file video that talks about that, but this is also this a cubed plus b cubed plus c cubed, because this will actually link especially 153 and 288. For instance, 1 cubed plus 3 cubed plus 5 cubed is 153. 153 is this lovely narcissistic number. So that's 135. But if we look at the others, 2, 4, and 6, which I mentioned earlier, the divisors of the first 6 numbers add up to 33. Well, 2 cubed plus 4 cubed plus 6 cubed is 288. So what you find is that 33 cannot be done, or it's the smallest, and yet these other numbers link up nicely to there. Also, what's his name? Daniel recent this comment, like, well, 1 squared plus 4 squared plus 4 squared is 33 as well, which is a 144 is also this pentagram angle. The sum of the first 4 positive factorials. So 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 plus 4. There you get, well, 1 plus 2 plus 6 plus 24 is 33. 288 is the multiplication of the first 4 positive factorials. So again, it's this nice link connecting. And this, okay, so now we'll look at the alchemists, hermeticists, and the emerald tablet, and the corpus hermeticum, and for instance Heinrich Kunrath. Now you can look at any of the alchemists, hermeticists of that period, and you'll find that they've got the same thing. Essentially, it's in Kabbalah as well. This, the tetractys and the tetragrammaton, which is, let's say, in Kabbalah, but also in Pythagorean schools. Another one by Heinrich Kunrath, where it's clearly stated that he's got this 1, 2, 3, 4 layered triangle. Athanasius Kircher, and then the 3, 4, 5 triangle, the magic square of 15. The pendulum is also, the cherub's also got a ruler there, and well, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the same representations by these, all these hermeticists, whether it was John Dee, Heinrich Kunrath, Edmund Gunther, were all teachers or professors, or very interested in Euclidean geometry. But the tetragrammaton and the tetractys is the same thing. And so it's also triangular numbers. So 1, the second triangular number is 3, so 1, 2, 3. The third triangular number is 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The fourth is 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that was also this, so again, 33, 288, how they nicely link. The largest positive integer that cannot be expressed as a sum of different triangular numbers. So the smallest or the largest, 33, is this really interesting number in this way, that it can or it cannot be, but also, well, in this Kircher drawing also we see the 6/5. And why does that connect? We'll see that. So this 6/5 diagram, so Dürer as well, if you look into the geometry of Albrecht Dürer, brings us back to the hexagon and the pentagon. So, well, the seed of life now, which will bring us to the tree of life. So we see seed of life, draw your line through get your axis going. Where the lines intersect, you mark out your points. And we have the tree of life. There we just drop it on top. So there we have how from the seed of life you can draw the tree of life. Except one spot is missing. Now there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sephiro, and there are 22 paths joining. So you can even see, so 10 sephiro and 32, so including the paths you have 32. However, what they call the hidden sephiro or dart is, as you can see, that's where it's, so most drawings won't have it, but when you draw it with the seed of life, you can see it's actually being marked out. There are other drawings which do include it and speak of it as well. So if you include the hidden sephiro, you have 33 combined paths and sephiro on the tree of life. It's also worth noting that a soccer ball is made up of 12 pentagrams and 20 hexagons to fuse, to create this three-dimensional shape. So what you have is 32 panels surrounding the 33rd central core. Now also, because you have 12 pentagons, that's a dodecahedron as well. So 12 around the 13th. 33 over 32 on the Scottish rite, 13 over 12 on the York rite as well. So 2 to 3-dimensional. So 33 defines a tree of life, 33 bones on the spinal column, including the fused bones. Californian Vara being one example, 33 inches, as well as a unit of land measure. Whether that emerged from Spanish legacy or, well, it's the origin of that would be interesting, but again, just another example of this usage of it in weights and measures as well. So the links between the 6 and 5 geometry, the seed of life, hexagons, pentagons, and the mathematical and the symbolic representations of what makes 33 so important. So symbols can be argued, because you can say it's arbitrary that a symbol has this particular meaning. But when it comes to the math and the geometry, these are universal laws. It doesn't matter where you are, when you are. This is the nature insists on it, and this could be. I would say I'll link this in the description. How to draw a perfect pentagram. And it's just interesting that these different shapes, geometry, symbols, all do have these very nice mathematical geometric connections, which I would say is probably the inspiration for why it appears in so many cultures across time, and why they would certain units of measurement would measure up to it. Because if they're studying the math or the geometry, these are guiding laws of the universe. Let's say it's built into nature. So if you were to set up a political or, let's say, a religious structure, you'd be looking at nature. You'd be looking above, as above, so below, and you see that these same math and geometry is repeated. It's all, well, something's going on here. There's something deeper in there, and so especially like why certain numbers across different cultures, different religions, consistently repeated. The same measurements are repeated in Hindu, Buddhist, Catholic, Christian. You'll also find it in the oldest mosques as well, where 108 feet, and the same which you'll find in these ancient temples are in later temples and mosques and churches and so forth. And well, that's the math. I would say is probably the most important foundation stone of it. Now, exactly why, can't say, but once they're all into their quadrivium. And anyway, with that, 33, hope you have a... Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'm going to add this to the 33 playlist and look at connections with these 33 and 32. I'll put the playlist in the description, because all these things are neatly, very nicely connected. But compass and the square, the basic tools of geometry, G being one of the explanations what the G stands for, geometry. So go to your board here. So what you have is a Scottish rite, where we have 33 degrees, but really 32 open, 33rd by invitation. Now there are a few things that could be said about that, but just as a general rule, 32 open, 33. Then we have the York rite, which has 13 rites. So again, up to the 12th, the Order of the Knights of Malta. Then we have the Order of the Knights Templar, the 13th. So again, 12 and the 13th. The eagle on the dollar bill, of course, we have the pyramid, and we could go into that, but geometry. It's essential now. One of my favourite scenes from the Contact movie is where they get this message, and what you have is they're trying to fit the pieces of paper together, or the images, and they don't match. And then Haddon says, well, They do, but you have to think like they do. You have to think in maximum efficiency. You have to think in multiple dimensions. The solution to the problem of them not fitting was because you're thinking in 2D. The solution was to think of these as three-dimensional objects, not two-dimensional objects, which is a good lesson to think about if you're examining the Great Pyramid. So we go back to the structure of Freemasonry, 33, so 32 plus the 33rd. The Yorkite, 13, 12 plus the 13th. The dollar bill, what has that got? Well, there are, count out the number of feathers, there are 17 and 15 on that side, 16 and 17 on that side, or 32 and 33, 32 and the 33rd. Earlier we went into Portolan mapping, all sorts of ancient and modern esoteric architecture, cathedrals, temples, major public buildings where we have the old Portolan mapping navigation system. Navigators need geometry. They carry dividers and a straight edge. It's the essence of everything really emerges from math and geometry. So we have 32 rays around the 33rd. Again, you'll see this in all sorts of architectural forms, symbolic forms, but that's the 32 and the 33. Now, a soccer ball, the traditional soccer ball, has hexagons, 6-sided polygons, and pentagons, 5-sided, 6 over 5. I won't go into that again, but that again is one of the essences of, for instance, the Great Pyramid, as including the subterranean section, 5 to 6. So 1/6 of the pyramid, if you include the subterranean, is 5 above, 6 in total if you include the subterranean. And there's so much to be said, 5 over 6. It's just built into all these esoteric art forms, essence of geometry as well. But what we have is 32 panels around the 33rd core point, just like that in 2-dimensional, but in 3-dimensional we have 32 around the 33rd. Hexagons and pentagons, 6s and 5s. Think in 3D. Now, what we also have on the dollar bill, 13 leaves, 13 arrows, 13 stars, said to be for the 13 colonies. If you scratch the surface a little bit, they should have included more colonies. It's interesting that they chose that number, but now, but the stars and the pattern in that particular set there, what we have is 13 stars in the Star of David or the hexagram pattern. Now consider the fruit of life, the seed of life, vesica. From the vesica we create the seed of life. From the seed of life you get the flower of life, and eventually a flower bears fruit. And what fruit does it bear? Well, 13. 12 around the 13th core point. Now, if you take those spheres off the 2D plane and stick them together in 3 dimensions, 12 spheres will perfectly match around the 13th central point. 12 around the 13. Yorkite 13 up to the 12 plus the 13th. And with that, now each of those points will create a dodecahedron, the 5th of the Platonic solids, not including the 4D hypercube or some others, but the standard Platonic solids. A dodecahedron has 12 sides made of pentagons. Dodecahedron, 12 pentagons around the 13th core point. A soccer ball, 32 panels of hexagons and pentagons around the 33rd core point. But there just happens to be 12 pentagons needed to create this particular pattern to fit these things together. The 32 and the 33 also encodes the dodecahedron, 2D and 3 dimensions. Geometry, it's a thing. I'll add this to 33. Have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. Now this is a video which I posted a while back. I just got an email from YouTube. It's been blocked in some countries because I used a clip. So I'll do an extended version, and importance the number 33, and specifically 33, NASA and Freemasons and these other esoteric connections to this number, but also ancient systems of measurement. So this is now formerly Cape Canaveral, now called the John F. Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where most of the US space program is based. And what do we have here? We have, this is the runway for the space shuttle landing. Of course, it's happening anymore. But that runway is designated either 15 or 33, depending on what side they approach from. But so therefore, at least it's runway 33. Now, just so happens it's at 33 degrees, so 30 degrees off true north in itself. So many connections there with the number, with 30 degrees, pendulums, and so many other aspects, but 330 degrees, runway 33. Now, Space Shuttle Atlantis retired after 33 missions. Could be coincidence, but we have also the Apollo missions, the launch sites. So the Saturn V rockets for the Apollo missions and the moon landings. Well, what's going on with the Saturn V rockets? 33 feet wide diameter, not including the fins, the rocket itself. Now, if you include the fins, there's a little bit more info in there, very hermetic, very astronomical, Earth, Sun, Moon, and stars, but let's stay with 33. So, famous astronaut Buzz Aldrin, 33rd degree Masons. This was the 10th anniversary of that landing, the issued coin. Got 33 degrees, Scottish Rite, Freemason. This flag, Buzz Aldrin presents this flag, which he took to the moon and he returned it, and it's presented to the House of the Temple in Washington, the headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the US. That's the flag picture of it. 33, Scottish Rite 33, and it's now housed in the House of the Temple in Washington DC, headquarters of 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemasons. There are 33 levels to get there, 32 open, 33rd by invitation only. Now this, there just happens to be 33 columns, and each of them being 33 feet high at the House of the Temple there. These columns are now in the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. They were originally from the US Capitol building. They just happen to be 33 feet high. There's the steps to the US Capitol building. There just happens to be 33 of them. Strong connections, a cornerstone ceremony and Freemasonry connected there. This is the Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis, 330 feet long. On the inside is the Tyler's Room, which is a cube with edge lengths of 33 feet. The number and the measure are very important, and I must add, very, very ancient. Very, very ancient, going back to Mohenjo Daro, Sumer, and Egypt as well. But let's stick with this for the moment. Very infamous, famous Denver Airport, 3,300 feet long, of course. Very curious connections, symbolic connections, and Anubis, the horse, and so much going on in there regards to the murals, but strong Mason connection there as well. Just to point out, this is part of a system. I'm not an ICist bagging this. There's information in here. They're passing on an ancient tradition. Resolution 33, passed by the 110th Congress, 2007, recognizing the thousands of Freemasons in every state in the nation and honoring them for their many contributions to the nation throughout its history, including George Washington, the founders of there. So long connection there. Now, Saturn rockets, Saturn V rockets, 33 feet in diameter, and it's at a 1:11 ratio of a height. But okay, mission badges as well. This is another interesting one. Mercury missions, early, like such as John Glenn. Mercury 7, that's the symbol. And what do we have? Well, Mercury, aka Hermes, or Thoth, or Nuar and Fuzi, gods of weights, measure, science, astronomy, music, geometry, arithmetic, and just knowledge in general, also referred to as the magicians. Tarot card of the magician, what do we got? We have Hermes, the winged cap. Sorry, hidden, but the caduceus, twin snakes around the wand, the measuring rod. And what do we have there? We have this alchemical hermetic symbol, also embedded there in NASA. But measure, length. Also other systems of measure, but okay, let's not forget about the Apollo missions themselves. The eagle of Apollo, the sky god, sun god, connected. Apollo gave Hermes the magic wand. The measuring rod was a gift from Apollo in return for the lyre, as in the constellation Lyra. But the eagle, famous on the US dollar bill, we have the eagle, 32 wings, 32 feathers on one wing, 33 on the other, as well as the repeated connections to 13. 13 levels on the York Rite, 33 levels on the Scottish Rite. But measure and length. So 33 feet diameter at 11:1 ratio makes it 363 feet high. What's that got to do with it? Ancient units of weights and measure converting to important systems of geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and also connections to music, because 363 feet just happens to be a perfect conversion point to 330 Saxon or Indus, Mohenjo Daro, or Royal Babylonian feet. So it's 33 feet in the allegedly modern English system diameter. You'll see this repeated throughout, even in ships, submarines, used all the time. They value this number and this specific measurement is, and again, very, very ancient. Very, very ancient system of knowledge. But so it's 33 feet wide and 330 Saxon / Indus, Mohenjo Daro, Harappa, or Royal Babylonian feet. Now this all connects back to sun, earth, and moon systems of measurement, astronomy, very hermetic. I'll put that in the next link, but 33 is at 33 feet especially is a very unique, very important number in itself, but the measurement of 33 feet, which is measurable, repeated in a symbolic sense, but also in a very tangible sense, where it's major public buildings. The list of current sort of modern buildings, whether it's cathedrals, Catholic cathedrals as well, is endless. But just as a recap, these major buildings connected to Freemasons, again, cathedrals, temples across the modern world religions, but again extending back in time, very, very ancient. And so whether it's steps, number of columns, number of the degrees, but also this 33 as a unit of measurement, and it is clearly measurable, repeatable, tangible. This is very important to them. So whether it's Washington, Brasilia, Canberra, Astana, London, Paris, or the Vatican, you'll find this symbolism of the number, but also the measurements connected to them, repeated. These cities, these major public buildings, these cathedrals, are not just randomly picked. They're highly designed, bespoke architectural buildings. It's not just off the plan, but they always repeat these same systems of numbers. These people didn't get rich by throwing money away, yet they will spend billions to build places like Astana, the most modern one, or Brasilia, or Canberra, or Washington before them, or London, Paris, New York, major cities, major buildings. And they repeat this, and it's a measurable, repeatable fact, and it also predicts future buildings, and that's the key to it. It's easy to look into the past, just pick something and then look for the repetitions of it, but it actually, you will find it in buildings under constructions and proposed. You'll find it by the same architects, whether it's, for instance, Norman Foster or Anish Kapoor, this sculptor. We'll look at him as well. But 33, 330 degrees, 33 feet, 330, 3,300 feet, repeated consistently. These in the allegedly modern secular rationalist organizations such as NASA, what is their obsession with the esoteric or the occult? It's repeated, it's tangible, it's measurable, and it is consistent. And these people in power, they don't just throw money away. And again, they repeat this. It is part of an ongoing ancient system, very, very ancient, going back to the beginning of recorded history. So Freemasons, esoteric, you could say a superstitious group from a time past, but NASA and these other agencies as well, the military industrial complex as well, use this measurement, and they use this number, and they use it all the time. Not just to explain the past, these units of measurement, these symbolic references, will actually predict the future. And so this will be part one, because 33, sun, earth, and moon, beautiful in geometry, very mysterious in arithmetic. Also on the modern temperate music, where you have a 440, but there's also connections, well, with 330, 55, and 66. But so the quadrivium, systems of measurement, hermetic knowledge, both from the, let's just say, ancient superstitious times, still repeated to this day, predicting the future also. So more to come on, this will be part 2, because sun, earth, moon, geometry, astronomy, of course, arithmetic and music. It is a repeated system. With that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 2 in this series where I'm looking at the number 33, the measurement 33, connections to NASA, Freemasons, but also, more importantly, ancient connections, firstly to Thoth, God weights and measures, Hermes Trismegistus, God of weights and measures, knowledge, science, astronomy. It can also be seen in Nuar, Fuzi, Ningishida, and these other gods who carry the measuring rod, but 33, sun, earth, and moon. Now firstly, if you look at the traditional Masonic symbols, now before free and accepted Masons, we had, where did these symbols emerge from? They emerged from craft guilds, stonemasons, tilers, bricklayers, the actual craft of construction and building, the great cathedrals, who were the masons who built so many structures across ancient Rome, ancient Greece, across Persia, Babylon, and in Egypt. Masons claim heritage going back to these very ancient times, but apart from the more symbolic nature of more modern Freemasons, but what are these symbols showing? Well, we have the columns, of course, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, but the compass, geometric symbols, G, geometry. Now, even notice free and free, as well as a little third there. But the square, the level, also to measure the plumb bob, so that is to measure level horizontally, that is to measure level vertically. The ruler, now to measure. Masons, whether it's non-esoteric or whether it's just purely practical masons or carpenters or anyone in any building trade, these tools of measurement are essential. And the units of measure will incorporate so much else, but also the symbolism. We'll look into it now. It's free in there. Now it's there's also there's a free there as well. But anyway, before we go there, these are the traditional symbols, tools of Masons, practical masonry, architects, stonemasons, anyone involved in construction. And that's why these tools are so special, because they have a practical purpose, but also in the symbolic sense, accuracy and truth in measurement is, as is seen in the Bible and the Book of the Dead and these other texts, that the being pure and honest in your weights and measures is strongly connected to morality as well. But at the very least, in the practical sense, these symbols are very important and to measure. Now, measure, length, gods of weights and measure, masons, stonemasons, builders, the trade, the craft, and measuring. So 33, sun, earth, and moon. So we're looking at the number 33, the significance of it, but also especially this measurement 33, which is repeated in the military-industrial complex as well, and there's other references, so we'll just in this particular episode we'll just be focusing on this. But the number 33, now it just so happens, so we'll just here is SI, or Standard International Standard Weights and Measures. So for instance 33 feet, and that's the yards, cubits, feet, span, palm, and how they break down. Now it just so happens that 33 feet converts to 30 Indus, Mohenjo Daro, or Harappan feet. It's one of the most ancient of the civilizations in the world. Now then, the Babylonian scale, Royal Babylonian, there were Royal Babylonian scale and the Babylonian scale. One was for the common people, Royal Babylonian was for temples, palaces, etc. Now the Babylonian scale doesn't it breaks down into fingers and grains, but at a different ratio, but still 3600 all connects. Now the Saxon foot, that was used, that was a predecessor to the allegedly modern English foot, which we would see over here, 33. Now the Saxon foot is at a rate of 1.1 modern English feet is a Saxon foot. And there we see how that breaks down now. 432, 108 foot, all your harmonics there. I've done plenty of other videos on these numbers and how it's the geometry, astronomy, arithmetic, music. It's just all in there. So I won't cover those again in the episode. If I remember, I'll put some links to earlier videos on these because these are just overflowing with the same symbolic connections, also measurement connections connecting to, well, especially sun, earth and moon, but undoubtedly the importance of it in geometry, music, arithmetic. It's all very, very clear, very measurable, and it's undisputable really. Now, the deeper connections to astronomy and this knowledge of the size of the earth and distances, well, firstly, ancient Rome, and not that they will probably be originators of it, but they had a very, very high level of understanding of the size, relative size of sun, earth and moon, relative distance of sun, earth and moon. They were able to do this with very simple techniques and logic. This was exactly the same simple techniques and logic that people did in recent time before satellites. We had very accurate measures of the earth, the moon, the sun, and the relative distances between them. This is not something of the space age. People were able to work this out prior to the space age, prior to satellites. And, well, again, that's clear in history. You can just look it up when size of Earth, Moon, relative sizes were developed. Very clear. Can be done with very simple techniques. But, so we'll be focusing now on this column here and the 33 feet. Now, 33 feet, a harmony point between ancient measure systems. I could also include Doric, Ionic, Long, and some others in here as well, but just want to focus on these particular ones now, especially the Indus, Babylonian, and the Saxon foot. And again, the Saxon foot, the predecessor of the modern English foot, origins, and it's been passed on because you can find it through cultures moving through time. It didn't just pop up out of nowhere as part of an ongoing tradition. But 33 feet, harmony point, ancient measures. How does that connect to sun, earth and moon? Well, so 1188, let's begin with that. So on the long hand scale, or Ionic feet, earth and the moon. Now, one Ionic foot is 0.96 feet. The Salamis stone, this is again written down in the Salamis stone, which is ancient conversion tool for between various ancient units of measure, including the Ionic. Ionic columns, which is one of the schools of ancient Greek architecture, the Doric, Ionic and Corinthian, and an Ionic foot. So it wasn't just a aesthetic style of architecture, it was also a measurement Ionic, because that was, as in Ionia, one of the regions of ancient Greece. And the house of it, so back to the House of the Temple in Washington, headquarters of 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemasonry in the US. 33 columns, each of those are 33 feet high, and they are Ionic columns. Now the Ionic column, you can find it again, tracing boards, a Doric column, the Corinthian column, and the Ionic column. See the swirls there? The Ionic system. So it's a system of measurement. It's also a style of architecture. Not just the columns, the way that the temples are decorated also is Ionic. You also, so a more modern Mason tracing board. Now, even there's so much stuff to come in regards to 33, but just so Ionic column, the column of wisdom, or the column female column. The Doric is male, Ionic is female, and the Corinthian is the virgin or the maiden. Also Ionian, or the Ionic musical mode, as well as Dorian or Doric as well. So there's a lot going. Now, 24 feet is 25 Ionic feet, is 24 to 25 scale, which converts to other ancient units of measure. It's just always, it's measurable. It's repeated so often. At some point, coincidence ends. And anyway, now the long scale or long hand. So what is a long? Well, it's also known as a Persian foot. One long or one Persian foot equals 1.056 feet. that's 33 times 32 is 1056, and we'll get into more in this future. But so the Persian foot, but there are some who would suggest that the long foot is actually, again, very, very ancient. For instance, Stonehenge Phase 1. Before the modern Stonehenge, or not, or the ancient Stonehenge, Stonehenge went through various developments. And so the original Stonehenge didn't have a stone circle there. It was the Aubrey holes. But the ditch, a henge is earthworks. So when people say Stonehenge, it's really a stone circle inside of a henge. So there are a lot of stone circles, but there are many more henges. These are these circular, these ditches. So the henge is the earthworks for ditch. But there we see 270 long foot, 300 long foot, and the ditch itself 330 long feet at that scale. So now that's measuring earthworks. Ditch is very difficult because erosion over time. It's not like a nice piece of stone where you have a definite edge to measure from, but at least as a suggestion. But 330 we see there. Now 528 fingers. Okay, 528 times 2 is 1056. This is an important reference because 528, now the mean diameter of the earth, anyway, 528 long span. Well, New Jerusalem, Solfeggio. Now, for instance, 1 mile is 5,280 feet. 32 rods is 528 feet. 33 pounds is 528 ounces. I'll get into more in this because this 32 over 33 or 12 over 13. 33 on the Scottish Rite, 13 on the York Rite. This is lovely connections to three-dimensional geometry. And, well, many other aspects, but just sticking, so that's a earth measure. And, of course, the mile as well, so, miles, yep. But, okay, now, 396 inches from 33 feet. Well, again, the long foot measures the earth. And, again, Ionic measures the moon. 132, well, that's long scale again, on measures the earth. Now, even these older systems of measure, so when they used to measure fish, 13,200 fish was called the last. You'll also, you'll see it'll appear in other very important geometric and other connections as well, which brings us to 44. The sun and the moon at 44,000, 44,000 on the canonical scale. Canonical fathom or canonical cubits. Now, what is that? Well, John Neal, I think, well, at least one of the popularized it, let's say. And so one canonical cubit is 1.728 feet. Oh, 1728 reference. That's 6 over 5 cubed. Now, why is that really nice, really important, this canonical scale? Well, firstly, 33 feet. So let's go, or 30 Indel's feet, or 30 Royal Babylonian, or 30 Saxon feet. Now this brings us to the pendulum. So a pendulum at 30 degrees, if that length, well, 1 second, I've done a whole series on pendulums and these connections, but just to do it quickly, now what we have is, well, if it's 3 feet, that's 1.00584 meters. Now, that 3 Indus, Sumerian or Saxon feet is 3.3 English feet, so 1/10 for 33 feet, which gives us an Egyptian raw cubit plus 3 millimeters. Now, that just happens to be 1.727876 feet. That's a difference from that's a difference from a canonical cubit of 0.0378 millimeters. Now, to put that in context, that's half the width of a very thin human hair. Now, there are certain curly hairs that are quite thick in comparison, but a thin human hair is twice the width of the distance from this connection between there. So, literally splitting thin hairs to get this difference from there. So the numbers might look different if you look at it just quick, but the actual difference is so minute. So sun and the moon at 44, again connecting these various ancient units of measurements, blending together through the same systems of pendulums, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. 440 music scale would be a connection. The Great Pyramid, 440 cubits. It's just repeated so often in other aspects as well. But so harmony points, ancient units of measure, bringing us to these lovely numbers, including 4, 3, 2, 108, 48, 36, etc., etc., joined together. And so 33 feet. The symbolic, the measurable connections as well, quite a bit more in regards to this, but so just to knock this one out. 33 feet, 33, sun, earth and moon, and have a good one. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be part 3 in this series looking at the number 33 and connections, ancient connections. We'll have a touch on some of those, but how it's still being used today. And well, Freemasons and the number 33, gone into that earlier, last episode, Metrology, astronomy, first episode, some connections. But what's going on here, 33? Well, Spaceport, America. There's a picture, and well, that's Spaceport, America. It's the headquarters of the Virgin Space tourism program that was just in the news just yesterday or today. They got one to the edge of space. And so who was the architect of this particular building? None other than Lord Norman Foster. We've done some videos on him. Everything he touches is built around this very, very important system. And just so happens that 33 degrees north passes through the facility. And there's some more info could go into that, but just okay, 33 degrees north for Spaceport, and just so happens to be Lord Norman Foster. And who is he next to? He's visiting another very important architect, Oscar Niemeyer. Amongst other things, Niemeyer was the architect of the UN headquarters in New York, which is, again, just overloaded with this sacred geometry, naology, sacred architecture. And why are they both important? Well, the Washington DC, the geometry connections in Washington, even the most hardcore skeptic has to basically can't deny that anymore. But we have four very important cities: Washington DC, District of Columbia; Canberra, ACT, the capital of Australia; Brasilia in the Federal District, the capital of Brazil; and Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, which is in the Akmola province, and done videos on this national capital, how they would also, for instance, relate to the city of London in London, which is different from metropolitan London. The city of London is one of 33 boroughs, but I won't go for that for the moment. But we just, now, how do they relate? Well, Norman Foster was the main architect of Astana. I did a long video on Astana, the town plan, all the buildings, just full of these, just the visual symbols, but also the metrology, the importance of repeated numbers that are just continually repeated and using and read through ancient measure scales. In the infinite sea of numbers, these architects always fall on the harmonics, the beautiful numbers. And well, Oscar Niemeyer, apart from the UN capital, the UN building in New York, which in itself is just like Washington, Astana, Brasilia, City of London, the UN precinct is basically a separate country with its own police force, its own post office, same sort of thing. But he was the architect of Brasilia, Norman Foster and Niemeyer. Now, how does that connect? Well, firstly, this is the flag of Astana. 32 rays around the outside on a sunburst. Now, why is that relevant? Because we can, again, like the flag symbolized there with the also the flag, but 32 rays around a 33rd central point. This is a consistent theme we'll see elsewhere, but the height of the presidential palace, which is at the very center of Astana, and the geometry and part of monumental axis, which is a common feature whether it's Washington, Canberra, Brasilia, Astana, just so happens to convert to 330 Doric span or 3,300 ionic inches. Now, Doric and Ionic are very important. Now, these are ancient musical systems, but measure systems, also architectural styles, going very ancient. And we see again, just in plain sight there on this is how you read these through the measurements. This is what these people do. They're architects, they're engineers, they work on measure. That's their important theme. So now, for instance, the Pyramid of Peace and Reconciliation in Astana, which is a true pyramid in that it's 203 feet high and 203 feet wide. But if you include the base, and you get all these other, but what we have there is at the center of this, at the illuminated part at the top third of the building where the sun shines through, we have this diplomatic table, 32 rays, and the 33rd sun ray coming in there once more. Now, where else? Well, let's go down to Uruguay and mark it out. This is 33, or State 33. The capital city, 33, 33, the city of 33, and 33 degrees south. It's named after the 33 Oriental leaders of Uruguayan independence who were Freemasons, and they were part of the Oriental Lodge. Orientals, Brasilia they have the main lodge there in Brasilia, capital of Brazil, which by Niemeyer, which is full of this info once again, symbols and measures, architectural designs. That's where the main lodge there is an Oriental Lodge, which is different from the English lodges. So basically Spain, France, Portugal, you'll find that's the Oriental lodges, and the 33 symbolism, even the postcode 33,000. Which brings us to the flood, as described in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, if you go to, this is from Sydney Masonic Museum, which everyone knows about Masons, but Oddfellows, Druids, a few of these other organisations, well, amongst them include the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes. And antediluvian means pre-flood. But the Flintstones, the Loyal Order of Water Buffaloes. So there's a little bit of a nod there even going on in the Flintstones, but the pre-flood. Which brings us to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh visits his ancestor Utnapishtim, who tells him about the flood and about the ark which they built. And the very old version describes a round boat, but the tablet 11 of the complete one, which was about 1500 BC, describes it as a cube, in that its walls were 10 times 12 cubits in height. The sides of its top were of equal length, so it's 120 by 120 by 120 cubits. It's a cube. Now, Royal Babylonian cubits, which were used at the time of this description of the Epic of Gilgamesh, 1.1 modern English feet is 1 Royal Babylonian foot, which is equal to 1 Indus Mohenjo Daro Harappan foot, or a Saxon foot. Mentioned previous episode, I use these measures, how they connect to Sun, Earth, Moon. And now, for instance, in Harappa, the aisles between the Great Granary are 33 feet, and you'll also find 33 feet wide streets, or 30 local feet. But in the modern scale, that's 33. How does that connect? So 120 cubits would be 198 modern English feet, which just happens to convert to 3,300 ionic fingers or digits. Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, but Doric and Ionic as music scales and measurement systems as seen in the Salamis stone. And I know Space Creator will get a kick out of this, because that just happens to convert to 2,376 modern inches, which will give it a total edge length of 2,376 feet, or 3,300 ionic span. Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood story from Mesopotamia. What do we have? 33 ancient measure systems. Which brings us to the New Jerusalem as described in the King James Version. It's 12,000 furlongs long, each edge. It's the same width as it is high as it is deep, and that's 12,000 furlongs in King James Version. Just after Edmund Gunter had established a furlong, which is 660 feet, or 10 chains, 66 feet is 1 furlong. And what do we get? Well, that's 2376000 hands, and I won't. I know someone's going to get that because it also just happens to convert to 2376000 Doric rods, sun, earth, and moon. But that would also be 330000 Ionic palms, Doric, Ionic. So the total edge length of New Jerusalem would be 33000 Ionic yards, Doric and Ionic once again. So 33, the symbols, you'll find it in ancient connections, lovely connections, and again passed on through these orders, such as the Masons, the Oddfellows, the Buffaloes, the Druids, and especially, well, Masons before free and accepted Masons. Masons were Masons. They were architects, construction, and what do? They measure, they use geometry, and they're very symbolic as well. So there you go. There's some more in regards to 33. Measure. It's at some point, coincidence has to come to an end, and there you go. This is it's been passed on. It's being used by modern, allegedly secular. So Oscar Niemeyer, most references would have him as a modern secularist atheist, let's say. But Norman Foster, Lord Norman Foster of South Bank, and the units and the symbols and the connections between, like Astana, okay, Washington and Canberra were built at a time when you might say, oh, but that was a superstitious time. Brasilia, 1950, this is now, we've entered the space age, and Astana is well into and it's a Islamic country as well, and they're doing it still now. Lots more to come on 33 because it just repeats. And yes, at some point, coincidence must end. To call coincidence, I would call the Nile is in denial. It's not a river on Egypt, and that the same people, the same connections, the same organizations repeat this, and repeat it in the same framework, and in the symbolic sense, or measurement sense, well, it's just there, like it's still going on. And personally, it's a beautiful, it's encoding knowledge. And back in not too long ago, whether it was math or geometry was considered heresy. You could get burned at the stake for it. So this is one of the reasons for the secrecy, because now we're a little bit more open. But yeah, it was not too long ago, it was a different time where you could exhibiting knowledge or looking into astronomy was very dangerous, very, very dangerous. And that's one of the reasons for the secrecy to it as well. I'd also suggest that there's a level of you got to earn it. Let's just say, it's what's given freely has no value to it, but what is studied and developed and examined has a deeper value, and that there is almost a trigger. Once you start looking, you see, and your eyes are open. And so systems of measure, ancient, embedded in all sorts of symbolism and legends and stories, and still with us now. Measure, and the truth shall set you free. Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. I'll put the playlist to the series in the description, but let's just carry on straight and look at some more interesting connections with the number 33. So this is the George Washington National Masonic Memorial. And there's Scott Onstott, Secret in Plain Sight. So if you just go into YouTube search engine, Scott Onstott, Secrets in Plain Sight, fantastic series, highly recommended. If you're new or even familiar with this area, if you haven't seen it, worth watching again. It's one of those things worth going back and watching as well because of the references and people he refers to in there. Great stuff in there. But so 3, 4, 5 triangle. But what's happening in regards to number 33, and especially Masonic connections with it? Well, it's here in this square and compass. And this is, I'll try to remember to put the link in the description. There's a PDF, but there's a lot of other, if you were to Google it, let's just say. But what you find is that this compass is angled at 33 degrees. So resting at a 33-degree angle. Now, the building itself is either 330 or 333 feet high. The architect of this building was Harvey Wiley Corbett, so important, and he's got his fingerprints in some really important connections. He was a Mason himself. And what's interesting is that so often is the case that non-Masons usually design Masonic temples. That's not a strict rule. In this case, we see Harvey Wiley Corbett, which did Bush Tower, not the Bush political family, he did Bush Tower in New York City, connected to the master apartment buildings and Nicholas Roerich, but Harvey Wiley Corbett is the architect. And there are different sources. I would lean towards 330 feet, but again, so just a question mark there. But because of 33 or 330 feet in so many other Masonic centres and these major cathedrals, Scottish Rite Cathedral in Indianapolis being 330 feet, but could be one of either. It's hard to find the exact number. But 33-degree angle of the compass and square. All these things are they do these buildings with designs with this Gnostic philosophy behind them. But so what we have is we're measuring with the compass or the protractor, we're measuring degrees of angle. So we're measuring angles there. Which brings us to Isaac Newton, famous alchemist, even though it's not maybe not talked about too often, but he had a remarkably small library. Isaac Newton believed that ancient Greek myths and the Bible, for instance, were encoded information, including alchemical information. I've posted some videos on that, but he's one of the masters, or the favourites of secular rationalist scientists. But it's not often talked about his beliefs, let's say. Now, for instance, another thing that Isaac Newton, he was very interested in the emerald tablet of Hermes and into translating it. Now, one of the famous things that Isaac Newton came up with, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. One of the famous quotes from the Emerald Tablet of Hermes is, just to paraphrase, as above, so below, which is a nice connection. Now, not necessarily to say that's where he got it from, but in this, anyway, that's a whole other lecture, let's say. But Isaac Newton, very interested in the esoteric, alchemy, amongst other aspects, and he did some work on temperature, measuring temperature, degrees of heat. Now here we see the term. Now I'll just do a close up here. Now water begins to boil with a heat of 33 parts. So he says here degrees of heat, but when he references it in the other parts, instead of saying degrees, he says parts. But water begins to boil at 33 parts, or 33 degrees. So that's boiling water, or 100 degrees Celsius. As we're on the Fahrenheit scale, if held at 33 degrees Fahrenheit, ice will melt. Actually, a bit of a struggle will happen. The ice itself can't get above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but water on its surface can get up to 33 degrees Fahrenheit. So 32, 33, just mentioned in earlier episodes. And, well, what's one of these repeated themes? It's you're measuring temperature. Measuring degrees of temperature and degrees of angle. 33 degree angle, 33 degrees temperature, which brings us back to Hermes, Thoth, Mercury. Even when the term is what's the Mercury, or the Mercury today, the weatherman will say, because he's talking about temperature, but gods of weights and measure. Hermes, Hermeticism, Hermes Trismegistus, always the Hermetic tradition, the Gnostic tradition. It's been passed on through groups such as the Masons. Now, back to the George Washington National Masonic Memorial. Okay, I covered in the pentagram series, but like 33 degrees. So the equilateral triangle would have 153 and 273. Very important numbers: Sun, Earth, and Moon, and it's in Bible and other texts. Structures across the world, across the ancient time, especially 273 or 27.3, just built into them, repeated in proportion, but also in ancient measure systems. But it's interesting that 33 is 10001, 100001 binary. It's a palindrome, same backwards as forwards. Even the number 33 is a palindrome. Okay, 153 in binary, 100110001, same backwards as forward. And 273, 100010001, same backwards as forward. Now in other numerations, 273 is so often in other numeration systems, it's also a palindrome, but the trinity or the triangle and the importance of this particular symbol, 33 degrees, dropping little hints there, and we'll get into the 33 math anyway a little later on in other episodes. But the George Washington National Masonic Memorial is in Alexandria, Virginia. And it's not unusual, but whether it's like I did series on New York and state capitals, but for instance, New York, you'll find Athens and other ancient names of ancient cities referenced throughout, especially in the east coast of America. Well, Alexandria, it's not named after someone, it's named after Alexandria, as in the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. But what else was in Alexandria was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the lighthouse of Alexandria. This is what this building was actually based on. So there are different pictures. You can pick and choose, but the descriptions of a lighthouse of Alexandria, this is where, even in the literature, it's no secret that this is what this particular building was based on. Alexandria in Virginia, it's like where this name was given before the memorial was built, so it's a nice little plug, I think, there as well. But this is it shows a Mason, so the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, but also names affiliated bodies such as the Tall Cedars of Lebanon, Order of the Eastern Star, Job's Daughters, Rainbow Girls, Order of the Mole, Daughters of the Nile, and Shriners there as well. So you have also the York Rite, which has 13, going up to the Order of the Knights Templar. It's the 13th level. But the Scottish Rite has 33 rites, or 33 degrees. 33, once again, 33 degree angle. Also worth noting, well, in this particular board, what do we have? We have the Lighthouse of Alexandria. There we can see a comparison to. Also, what I think is worth noting, because there's a very similar board or chart, and then the structure or the steps of Freemasonry. So you have 33 in the Scottish Rite, but this one has the Temple of Solomon. So Hiram Abiff, the story of Hiram Abiff and the king who helped King Solomon build the temple, famous in even the biblical descriptions that there were the red cedar of Lebanon, the tall cedars of Lebanon. That's essentially where Baalbek is. Even on a Lebanese flag, the Lebanese red cedar was a famed material going back in time. The Egyptians imported it, ancient Egyptians imported it all that way. You will also find it in Mesopotamia, but this timber was highly valued even for millennia after. Still is now. For instance, a Parliament House building here in Australia, including pink granite. There are pillars, columns on the inside, which are red cedar. So the certain materials get repeated even in modern secular designs. They're actually reusing the themes and the materials that go into it, the numbers, the measurement systems. just a repeated thing. But so we have Solomon's Temple and Hiram Abiff, which had the pillars of red cedar and the tall cedars of Lebanon as that affiliated group. Now in the building itself, the Masonic Memorial in George Washington National Masonic Memorial, I think it's the second or the third level, the cedars of Lebanon. Just let me pause them. Okay, so this is a page by the Masonry.org, the George Washington National Masonic Memorial. It's got some interesting info in here. There's quite a bit going on in this structure, but also amongst the stained glass, Ben Franklin, George Washington, Mordecai Gist, Robert Livingston, not too sure on this guy, but Lafayette was also the very important figures. But see some pictures from the inside. But I mentioned the tall cedars of Lebanon, Hiram Abiff, and Solomon's Temple. Okay, it's a little bit slow connection. Okay, so the Ark of the Covenant, but in the cryptic room, Hiram Abiff, the important architect. So Hiram Abiff, King Hiram, sent masons to King Solomon to teach the priests how to build. So he couldn't send, because only priests were allowed to enter the sacred precinct. They had to learn from Hiram Abiff and his teachers how to do the masonry work. And of course he also supplied the red cedars of Lebanon. Hiram Abiff, again, engineer architect of the Temple of Solomon. Hiram Abiff was also a teacher of geometry. Cryptic room, so even the 9th level of the house is a scale of a throne, sponsored by the tall cedars of Lebanon. So it just brings us back to, again, this tall cedars of Lebanon, the Temple of Solomon, and Hiram Abiff, as opposed to this other board with the Lighthouse of Alexandria. So 33 degrees, George Washington Masonic Memorial. Most likely I would say it's actually 330 because of the architect Harvey Wiley Corbett. But that's, the sources are a bit conflicting. But degrees of the compass, and then Newton temperature scales. So these people who are so important in establishing the basics of our modern science, which is built on weights and measures. All science emerges from that. That's the essence of it, and geometry. And so we just have, again, these measurable, interesting connections. And so as one or two as a whole, one or two is, well, coincidence, but then the deeper you dig and you follow the money, follow the people, follow the traditions, and hell, yeah, it's there. And they're very much into their math, and they're very much into their geometry, and at the essence of any structure, architecture, weights, measures, geometry, it's just essential. And then the added elements of it. But even the naming of Alexandria, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, 33 degrees in a organizational sense, 33 degrees by the compass, and 33 degrees also by temperature. So again, just another example of these links. Now notice even this serpentine structure, George Washington designed the serpentine wall, and you'll even see it in the older style of Mason third degree tracing boards, where you'll always see in the background, you'll see a winding or serpentine river, but that's something else. Anyway, 33, more and more, it really is a thing. Cheers, and measure, and the truth will set you free. Have a good one. Another connection worth mentioning is 33 and horsepower. Now, one horse does not produce 1 horsepower. One horse has many horsepower, but how did they, back to James Watt with the steam engine and so forth, 1 horsepower? Well, it's connected to 33. So what horsepower means, in Watt's judgment, 1 horse can do 33,000 foot-pounds of work every minute. Otherwise, a horse exerting 1 horsepower can raise 330 pounds of coal 100 feet in a minute, or 33 pounds of coal 1,000 feet in a minute, or 1,000 pounds 33 feet in 1 minute. We'll even think of the Olympics, the 110-yard dash at 33 feet. So weights, measures of temperature, pressure, angles, length, etc. It's quite an interesting historical footnote. Hello, this will be a geometry video and I'll end with a demonstration of how to draw it, but 32 over 33 and why this is so important. St Mary's Cathedral here in Sydney, and well, just one example, and so we have the main stained glass window, and what we have is 32 points around a 33rd central core, and so that's from the inside, and we get a better view of there. This is a very old, and 1800s was this cathedral built, but we go back many centuries before that to Palma Cathedral in Spain. Interesting astronomical alignment sort of event going on there as well, but again this window, and we have 32 points around the 33rd central core again. The Kokelberg Basilica in Brussels, the dome there just happens to be 108 feet wide. No surprises, every cathedral carries these same symbols, the same measurements and the same information, and 32 around the 33rd central point. St Paul's Cathedral in London, both in the dome above where we have again this division of 32 around the 33rd point, which is also projected onto the floor as well. The London Eye, 32 carriages around the 33rd core point. Again, it's a standard. And so this is Voortrekker Monument in South Africa, 32 sun rays, and it's also talking about the Ben stone and the Egyptian creation legend mentioned in there. Monument to the Discoveries in Portugal, we have 32 flanking the 33rd, Henry the Navigator. The compass wheel, 32 around the 33rd point, and even the opening was 32 ships plus the 33rd being the Discovery monument itself. UN flag, 32 sectors around the 33rd core point. The American dollar bill, again full of this type of symbolism and information, and 32 feathers and 33rd on the other wing. Scottish Rite, famously 33 feet in the Scottish Rite headquarters, all the Scottish Rite buildings 33 feet, and their symbols were 32 rites open, 33rd by the invitation only. Also interesting that the standard soccer ball design of hexagons and pentagons, we have 32 panels around the center being the 33rd point. Each, by definition, put simply, each side of a Great Pyramid is 440 cubits, and therefore you can cut that down to 55 units before you get to 22.5, but that creates a 32 division around a 33rd central point. These are the older mapping systems, Portolan mapping as it's called, and it's always 32 of these rays around the 33rd central point, so 32 points on the outside, and the center being the 33rd. So the Orentius Phineas map, Perry Reese map, and all these other maps which include America before Columbus, even Antarctica depicted in very accurate depiction of the coastline, not the actual physical coastline, and the ice as well. Anyway, that was a Portolan mapping system. Here's another example, 32 rays around the 33rd central point. Now we'll draw it, but this is in so many aspects, this 32 over 33 is a very important geometric construction in regards to mapping and so many other aspects.
Whether it's in ancient mapping systems like Portolan, you find it in cathedrals, major monuments, major memorials, is this 32 point star, and especially that would be 32 points around the 33rd. Similar theme in the UN flag. It's a relatively easy construction to do. It's based on a square, so square, 4, octagon, twice that, so 4, 8, and 16 and 32, and it's always good, the power of the vesicas, not only in the information itself it contains, but also as a template for drawing, so we can begin. with a vesica pisces or vesica piscis, just two circles with the edge of the second circle on the, with the center of the second circle on the edge of the first. You don't need this construction line, I'm just using it to help along. Which one in screen? Okay, and so what we have now is a line, but now we've created a, it's at 90 degrees, so 180 degrees, so we divide up into 4 sections of 90 degrees. And put it in the center. That's enough. Okay, so now we can, size doesn't matter, we're going to draw a circle on the center, on that center point, and we know that this is 90, 90, 90 degrees. Just draw this one a little bit darker so it separates it from the others. Okay, and now we have all the necessary points of the square. So it's just a matter of where that circle intersects those 4 points. If you draw, like, it's good to, you know, you put your pen on the point there, and then you can get a good line there with your ruler or straight edge. Technically, this is a ruler, it has marked points. A true straight edge doesn't have markings on it, but as long as you're not using it, it's the same as a straight edge. Okay, so now we have our square, and we now need to divide that into, we'll divide it up twice and to get an 8-pointed star. Now whether you're dissecting a line or an angle, bisecting, you're cutting it in half. So all we have to do is put the point on one of the corners there, make sure that the compass is set to at least halfway. It can be anywhere between there, and if I draw an arc, and I'll do the same in this corner. Okay, so now between this point and that point, as you should see if you draw it properly, it should go right through the center of the original square. Mark those off. Now we do the same. Should have just carried on with this arc. Same over here. And so now through the center line there, that should pass through the center of the square. Let's mark those off. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more points. This will now create a square. And what we've done is we've created an octagon. Or an octoad, depends on, octagon is an 8-sided poly. Now we have a 8-pointed star. Two squares it. So we have one square, and we have the other, just to show it in, just to highlight them. So our first square, and now we have the second, so we've divided the circle up into 8 equal points. And now we don't even need the compass anymore, it's just a matter of, so whether these two squares intersect, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points all up. So now I'm just going to draw a line through here, through the opposite side. Okay, you can mark that off. And now we're going to do the same through here, through the center and up there. again through the center. Again through the center. Okay, so now it's just a matter of matching up those squares again. So it's this point to there. Pretty straightforward, just count them out. If you can't envisage where the square would be, it's just a matter of first. So the first unmarked you miss, and that's on the second one. And with those 4 remaining, we have another square. Just a matter of linking up the unused markers. And so now we've doubled the 8-pointed star and we've created a 16-pointed star. And from here, it's just a repetition. So now between each peak, so we have this trough, we just run a line through the center, or should cross the opposite side. And we can mark those off. We're just basically bisecting the angle using the construction that's already here rather than doing it with the straight edge. Again, each time the ruler should run over the center. This will double 16 to make it a 32 points around the circle, which is the way which the old Portolan mapping, it's built into especially stained glass in cathedrals, but also on floor patterns and elsewhere. Just so you don't get lost, just remember each time you just got to find one of those troughs, run the ruler over the center, and it will automatically align for you. So now we've divided the circle up into 32 equal sections, and the centre would be the 33rd point. Now I could continue like with drawing that whole star, but the way that it's done in Portolan mapping, and you'll see it, I'll show a comparison with cathedrals. It's just a matter of drawing these lines through the centre to create the final pattern. It's all compass and edge stuff, and it's had pretty basic Euclidean geometry, but that's the thing, like when you attach the word sacred to it, it sort of gives it these other aspects that, the actual beauty in this geometry is the compass and straight edge aspect of it, that it's built, these very simple rules go to describe so much of nature in itself, because these basic rules of geometry can be found everywhere, and they pretty much define most everything, not everything, and that's a key point. There's a lot of kumbaya stuff in regards to it, and again, it's an unfortunate term, probably sacred geometry, it's just what's stuck. and a bit like sacred number. Now, some numbers are more beautiful than others, but all numbers are essentially lovely in themselves because they're part of this much wider discipline, and it's also the logic involved in this geometry and how we can work out so many things about our world around us through some of these very basic rules. And so there now we have our 32 pointed wheel, 32 points around the 33rd core, which will tee up, such as the UN flag, US dollar bill, countless cathedrals, monuments, memorials, old mapping, even like 33 gods of Mount Meru, 33 Vahana, and just a repeated pattern.